Chapter 71. Count Allergus Tuvino. Adventurer level, not applicable. Vampire, Balushinian. I've always hated the stench of war. Even the wonderful scent of blood on the air is spoiled by the various odors that accompany it. Various fires burning questionable things, body odor, rot, and feces assault the senses whenever one is unwise enough to breathe through one's nostrils. One can become acclimatized to it, given the chance, but never immune. The assault on one's nose will begin anew when one least expects it. Honestly, it even ruins the view. I watched impassively from my balcony as the new slaves sorted through their previous belongings. Anything of value will be put to use, the rest of it will be burned. Despite the stench ruining the mood, I found some amusement that the accursed drow were having to divide their own possessions in such a manner. It would have been more amusing if the reason for this task falling to the drow weren't so dire. Normally, newly created vampires would carry out tasks such as this. However, it had been so long since we had new recruits that even the youngest of us was resistant to such commands. I spat angrily at the slaves. If that damned half-breed hadn't failed, we wouldn't be in this mess. Maybe if he had known what was at stake. No, that would have been a misstep for us. It was fortunate that the memories of the fair folk are incompatible with the mind of an infant. Because he was lacking those memories, he did not know of the cycle of redemption we are doomed to face, and he could not leverage it against us. There's no doubt in my mind that had he known, he would have demanded more and more and more until there was nothing left to give. Such is the nature of a spoiled brat like Kirin Yeth. May he and the bitch that birthed him suffer an eternity of torment. The Yeth matriarch had seemed like an amazing boon at the time, though. When we first received word of her grievances with Lofin and his court, we approached her nearly salivating. We were desperate to improve our situation and avoid the cycle. In hindsight, it should have been alarming to us that she was salivating as well. We believed that her eagerness would help us succeed in overthrowing Lofin and taking back our home. Instead, she died, and her son turned out to be an insufferable brat. Not a one of us could have foreseen the consequences of our scheming, though. It was definitely unexpected for Lofin to hear of Kirin's failure before we did, from the orcs no less. If it weren't for a few sympathetic ears in Lofin's court, we would all be waiting to be reborn by now. A good portion of us were able to avoid the hunt, of course. Lofin's lack of leadership capabilities served us well in that regard. Then the damned orcs invaded and began to hunt us as well. Now our backs are against the wall and— "You are summoned, Count Tuvino." A crow perched in a nearby tree cawed. "By whom?" I demanded, angry at the interruption. "Duke Misil demands your presence." "I understand," I replied in a much more reasonable tone. "I will make haste." I turned from the crow and made my way through the building that was currently acting as my manor. A meager manor, certainly, and not even close to matching my previous accommodations. The manor I had been living in, belonging to a drow countess that was quite enamored with me, was far superior in nearly every aspect. However, that manor is now destroyed, as is the family that allowed me to live there. A damn shame, their blood was freely offered and quite delectable. The thought angered me as I marched through our war camp towards Duke Misgiel's lodgings. There are 3 remaining vampire dukes, and Duke Alab Misgiel is by far the mightiest of the 3. Each of them had experimented with vampiric mastery, and each of their experiments ended in failure. Duke Bani and Duke Hilgro were both weakened by their failures, but Duke Misgiel's experiments made him much stronger. While he failed to become a master vampire, he managed to enhance his body and his vampiric abilities. He also commands more soldiers than any other vampiric noble, partly because he's a skilled tactician and partly because he knows when to avoid a fight. There's no question that if we manage to take back the Night Kingdom, Duke Misgiel will be king, which makes this summons rather concerning, especially given recent events. "Milord," someone shouted at me. I turned and saw a slave in tattered clothing running toward me. My jaw nearly dropped at the audacity. "Milord, we're running out of rations for the brood," she said once she caught up. "And, well, what do we do? They need to be fed, milord." I stepped toward her with a piercing glare. "I do not understand your confusion," I growled. You claim the brood are nearly out of rations, yet you still have blood in your veins and meat on your bones. Wah! Feed them! I slammed the suggestion into her mind. It will be done, my lord, the drow slave said vacantly. I watched angrily as she turned and went back the way she came. Imbecilic drow, I muttered to myself as I continued on my way. They are a plague upon this land. Like most animals, they are deaf to the voices of those above them. Or perhaps they're simply incapable of the deeper understanding required to interpret those voices. Either way, the end result is an inability to accept the offer to become a vampire. Even the higher beings cannot communicate with them, and as such have limited influence over them. Most drow are also atheists, in spite of the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. It is said that large gatherings of drow drive away the higher beings because they hate being ignored. But that is simply conjecture. The fact that these cretins pretend at society fills me to the brim with the fiery passions of rage. They lay claim to titles without possessing a single ounce of nobility. They pretend at being barons, counts, queens, and even kings. One need not look long to see why they are unsuitable for the duties of governance. The actions of their so-called king has allowed the orcs of the unified chiefdoms to invade all the way to their capital. Worse, the lives of the drow living in the Night Kingdom can only improve if the orcs manage to win the day. Damn them, these pretenders have held their power for far too long. It's past time that we remove this second set of titles from our kingdom. A guard signaled for me to halt as I approached the Duke's lodgings. I waited outside the massive stone structure while the guard confirmed that I was expected. At one point, the building had likely served as a guild hall for adventurers. It was modest in appearance, yet massive enough to serve an important purpose for the Duke and his entourage. The guard received an answer from within and stepped aside with a slight bow, allowing me entry. I passed the guard, stepped inside, and was immediately met with an intense bustle of activity. The Duke's peons were well at work, calling to each other about this and that over the sounds of their various activities. Count Tuvino, a weathered vampire, greeted me with a bow. This way, if you please. It isn't common for one as old as this to become a vampire. The fallen wilder that made the contract must have been waiting for a very long time. I followed the elderly former elf up a flight of stairs and down a long hallway. At the end of the corridor was a door that opened into a large room housing a series of large tables. Each table was covered in a variety of tomes, papers, writing utensils, and weapons. The Duke was sitting at the head of one such table, with other vampires standing and sitting around him. "Presenting Count Tuvino, Your Grace," the Old One bowed. "Good, that will be all, Klasno. Take the servants with you," Misil said while waving for me to sit. I gave a respectful bow and took the offered seat, catching stares from the other nobles at the table. Each of their eyes pierced through me, knotting my stomach. There was little doubt as to why I had been summoned. "Tuvino, I trust you are well," Misil said with an air of hostility. "Yes, Your Grace," I replied, averting eye contact. "Thank you for asking." "Good. Now, we haven't had a chance to debrief regarding the— What was his name?" he asked, grabbing a sheaf of papers from the table. "Master General Kirin Yeth." "Yes, we haven't had a chance to discuss this matter yet." I stayed silent, allowing the Duke to read from the papers. "You were entrusted with Yith's well-being, were you not?" Misil asked after a few moments. "Yes." "Your Grace?" "Then why did he fail?" "Because he foolishly underestimated the orcs." "Oh," the Duke asked angrily, "was it not your responsibility to weed out such foolishness?" "With respect, Your Grace, I must protest such an assertion," I replied, offended. "One cannot forcefully remove a thing which is integral to one's being. Yith was half drow, and his mother was a queen amongst fools." A murmur of agreement came from the other nobles, but died out quickly once the Duke raised his hand for silence. "So you say. Yet Kirin Yeth was competent enough to infiltrate Lofin's military and rise to its peak. Respectfully, Your Grace, I must once again protest. Lofin does not select his generals based on merit, but rather on the lack thereof. Yith's rise in the false king's military speaks more toward his foolishness than it does his competence. We should have expected as such from a half-breed." a noble whom I didn't know muttered. Silence. Duke Misil shot the noble a glare before turning back to me. So you claim no responsibility for this? No, Duke, I do not. And why not? Because I did as I was bade, Your Grace. I provided counsel, ensured that the child would grow to be as competent as possible, and even supported his ill-conceived strategies. There was simply nothing further I could have done. Duke Hilgro's plan was doomed from the start, another noble said. There are those of us who knew this from the moment a half-breed was mentioned. More mutters of agreement sounded from the other nobles. Duke Misil stared at the gathered nobility until they silenced themselves once again. Fine, you are absolved of responsibility, he said after a few moments. It is a shame, though. Despite its reliance on a half-breed, the plan was truly inspired. I would have liked to see it come to fruition, if only because it would have ensured a more rapid rise to dominance for us. No matter, I have another reason for summoning all of you. Those at the table stared silently at the Duke while he exchanged the papers in his hand for another sheaf. The crows spotted an orc scout, who most certainly saw us. This scout was able to slip away from us, so the orcs know where we are. Then we must put our plan into action sooner than expected, one of the nobles said. Plan? Quite true. Though it would seem that the orcs are content to continue their attack on the capital, they might change their minds and march on us at any time. We outnumber them, do we not? Another noble asked. Yes, but they have mages, and their leaders seem knowledgeable of our kind. Even if we were to win, we would lose many and still have to face Lofin's army. No, we cannot risk a confrontation with the orcs at this stage. We must move forward. Pardon me, Your Grace, I interrupted. Move forward with what? I have heard of no plan. Neither have many at this table, the Duke chuckled. I shall elaborate then. We are going to invade our former siblings, specifically the lands to the south known as the Deep Wild Forest. Shocked silence was the only reply. I was stunned, but managed to get a hold of myself and close my gaping mouth. This couldn't be real. If anyone knows how to destroy a vampire, it would be the fair folk. They most certainly would not be willing to cohabitate either. They see us as unclean and strike us down without mercy, as one would crush an inconvenient bug. Worse than that, they can be reborn almost instantly. If we were mortals, our actions in trying to wipe them out would have some impact on them. But the wilds and their wilder would pay no heed to our intentions. The fair folk will just keep coming, no matter how many of them we kill. But the Duke knows this. He must. Why? I asked meekly. What could there be to gain? Reinforcements, the Duke chuckled again. As you know, there have been many experiments regarding vampirism over the centuries. One such experiment saw a rather interesting result. Misil rose from his seat and set the papers down. We can force the spirit of a wilder into the body of a mortal, he said, leaning onto the table. This makes the fair folk very useful to us. All it takes is a quick ritual that creates something quite useful. Bring it in. The doors opened, and two servants guided a hooded figure into the room. We were able to identify what this thing was before the servants were able to remove the hood, though. A scent that mixed blood, death, and power. The unmistakable smell of a vampire. The servants removed the hood from the creature's head, and a small gasp escaped one of the nobles as its features came into view. The servant stepped back with a bow, presenting us with a drow. A drow that was definitely a full vampire. He regarded us with a vacant gaze as the murmurs began. That's a vampire, not a half-breed, one noble whispered. How is such a thing possible? The Duke raised his hand for silence once more, and the din died down. He grabbed the drow by the arm and dragged him over to the table. As you can see, this ritual works on drow as well, he said. But despite what your senses are telling you, this creature is not a true vampire. Allow me a quick demonstration. Misil picked up a dagger from the table. Take this dagger, he said to the drow. The drow took the dagger. Place your left hand upon the table. The drow mindlessly complied. Pin your hand to the table, the Duke said coldly. In a flash, the drow sunk the dagger through his hand and into the table. Cries of surprise and alarm rang throughout the nobility, but I found myself enraptured by this development. A vampire that will do whatever you tell it to do. Interesting. This vampire-like creature has no agency. It will do as I tell it to do, without a single question or concern. As such, it isn't really a vampire, the Duke laughed. It's a mindless slave, a true thrall. Whomever performs the ritual forms a direct connection to the thrall that allows one, with some practice, to give commands by thought. My experimentation thus far has not found a maximum distance for this effect. Truly remarkable, fantastic even. There's just one problem. How will we capture the fair folk? I asked. We will march our forces and slaves to the very border of the deep wild forest. From there, we abduct as many of the wilder as we can using iron. Iron is fatal to them, though, one of the nobles said. Yes, but before it kills them, it weakens them. We will use this time to perform the ritual and make them into thralls. Misil took the dagger out of the drow's hand. It didn't flinch. I had hoped to use the element of surprise, but it would seem that they are somehow prepared for us. Still, I'd gladly trade brood for thralls. They eat a lot less. The Duke smiled as a few laughs came from the gathered nobility. My mind began reeling at the possibilities. Vampires, mindless or not, are much stronger and faster than brood can ever hope to be. They are also much more difficult to truly kill. With enough thralls, we would be unstoppable. When we run out of slaves or wilder, we will invade the orcish lands and replenish our numbers, Misil said as he took his seat. We will need to be fast to take advantage of their preoccupation with loafing. And when we replenish our numbers, what then? I asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it said. Then we take back the Night Kingdom. Chapter 72. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 7, Human American. We're getting close now, Larry said. These Fae and I are familiar with one another, so please allow me the honor of introductions. Don't worry, Rebis laughed. I know better than to give my name to a Fae. Well, actually, these Fae already have names, so there's no need to be Just a joke. Ah, right. The forest around us creaked and moaned as we continued walking. The weather had changed from sunny to overcast and windy not long after we'd entered the woods. Thankfully, it wasn't raining, but the smell was there. We should pick up the pace, I said. It's going to rain soon. I think it would have already if it was gonna, Nash replied. You can't smell it? I asked with a puzzled expression. Smell what? The rain? Yeah. Of course you can smell the fucking rain, he sighed. 'Cause that makes sense, right? Why not? You really can't smell that? No, damn it. The fuck do you even mean? I smell wind and trees and dirt. I don't smell nothing special either, Rebus added. Me neither, Mako shrugged. The rest of the group shrugged and shook their heads, except for Yulk, who was stroking his chin. He was so lost in thought that he stumbled over a root, but caught himself with his staff. He turned to look at the root in question with a very confused expression. Look, I don't know how to explain a smell, I said, exasperated. All I know is that it smells like it's going to rain soon. He's right, it is, a voice said from behind us. We froze and turned around, but didn't see anything amiss. Gali reached for his bow, but Rebis stopped him with a gesture. We stood silent and listened for a moment, then Hino stepped forward. Who's there? He asked. You're looking right at me, the disembodied voice replied. We exchanged confused glances. Okay, but that doesn't answer my question. Hino crossed his arms. While you're at it, why can't I see you? Listen, little thing, I was just trying to be helpful. It's taken a lot of effort to hold onto my leaves with all this damn wind. One of the trees rotated slightly. Ain't really got the energy for introductions, and we don't need to know each other anyway. So why don't you bugger off now? Yeah. Fair enough, Hino said. Let's get going. Hino turned and began to walk before the shock wore off for the rest of us. Larry levitated after him, and the rest of us had to jog to catch up. So, the fuck? Rebis asked once we caught up. Dunno, Hino shrugged. Didn't want to find out the hard way, though. Since when are there trees that can talk? Nash asked. All trees can talk, but not usually via vocalizations, Larry explained. That was a grosp. They dwell within old-growth forests and interact with the fairfolk pretty often. That one was more social than most. Didn't seem very social to me, Gali said. Precisely. Most of them are quite wary of mortals, a deep-seated prejudice that has sat within them since times long forgotten to everyone else, Larry said, then shrugged. At least that's what the Fae have told me. I didn't even realize that the Grosp can present as trees, Yulk said casually. I was under the impression that they typically take the form of massive agaric growths. A what? Rebis asked before I could. Agaric, Gali answered. It's a type of mushroom. So there's big talking mushrooms somewhere out there. Could be in here too, Mako chuckled menacingly. You never know. Yeah, don't like that. Some things just shouldn't be able to talk. Marco chuckled louder and stopped as we came to a sudden clearing. The sound of wind abruptly ceased, and a sense of mystery hung in the air. Larry floated in front of us and beckoned for us to follow him. I've come to call in a favor, if it's convenient, Larry called out. And those with you? We looked around for the owner of the voice, but saw no one. Interested parties, and insofar as I can tell, friends of the fairfolk, the Lich replied, some of which are proven as such. Yes, Nick, Nash, Yulk, allies of the Deep Wild, permissions were granted. Not here, though, far from here, in more ways than one. Name your payment for the debt we owe. I humbly request the aid of your expertise with language and puzzles. This may be a challenging task, and so I am willing to discuss compensation, if need be. A challenge, you say? With an audible pop, a figure enveloped in bright light appeared in front of Larry. My first instinct was to shield my eyes from the brightness, but I quickly realized that the light wasn't hurting my eyes at all. Confused, I lowered my hand and looked at everyone else. Their confusion met my own, and we all looked at the Fae as if it weren't shining like a star. It was nude, androgynous, and levitating at the same height as Larry. It held its hands cupped just below its sternum and had its eyes closed. Somehow, though, I could tell that it was still staring at me. Gah! Rebis shuddered. I don't mean any kind of offense or rudeness, but that's a creepy sort of vibe you're giving off. As is intended, then, the Fae winked without moving its eyelids. Larry held up his hand as a warning for silence, and we obliged. May I introduce you? The Lich asked the Fae. No need, Vian replied. They know me now, and I them. And it was true. I knew of the Archfey of the Court of Stillness. Its name, Vian, granted by a mysterious being that leaves a hole in my mind. It loves the way that ice slowly forms when autumn first arrives. It hates the smell of flowers and has a flair for the dramatic, even compared to the other wilder. It once kicked Mummeldobran in the non-physical equivalent of a dick for becoming a king and leaving the court. It felt as if I'd known it all my life, but had amnesia about how we met. I knew of Vian, but not of the Court of Stillness, or why it was angry with Mummeldobran for leaving. The word wilder popped into my head, and from context I was able to guess its meaning, though I'd never heard it before. When these discrepancies came to mind, my stomach tied itself in knots. I want you to know that I did not enjoy that, Ten said angrily. Enjoy what? I asked. Whatever that thing just did. All my neuromapping just flew right out the window and into a puddle. Don't think any of them would make interesting playthings for us except Nick. Though playing with Nick would lead to some rather serious problems, Vian sighed. Nash might be fun for some of the fairies, but his hot temper would quickly escalate to the point of ruining things. The Bone Fae would love Mako, but he would break too quickly. Rebis would entertain the sirens or sprites for a time, but the issue of keeping it in his pants would limit that enjoyment to half a day at most. Haino and Gali are too cautious for play. Ithrima and Yulk are too curious for play. Congratulations, you are all safe. For now. I see. Well, I suppose that saves us some time, Larry said. Though the veiled threats are unnecessary, Vian, I came for aid that you owe to me, and these mortals are under my protection. Let's not be rude. Vern knows no other way to communicate, another voice called from behind us. We turned and watched a skeleton enter the clearing. It walked right through our little group and up to Larry. Something about it felt off, as if its bones didn't all belong to the same being. It took me a second to realize that it was a bone fae, like King Horth back in the deep wild forest, but not wearing any facsimiles of flesh and fabric. The bone face stopped in front of Larry. The two skulls regarded each other with their empty sockets and fleshless faces. "It is a pleasure to see you again, Nerton," Larry said. "Same, Larry," the bone fay replied, then raised a bony fist. "Fight me." Everyone, including Vern, froze for a moment. Nerton pumped his fist in the air, causing a rattling noise. Larry regarded the bone fay carefully, then shook his head sadly. "We don't have time, I'm afraid," the lich said. "I am tasked." "Who tasks you?" Nerton asked. "I'll destroy them, then we can fight." "I task me. Then we can—" "No, but perhaps at a later time," Larry held up his hand gently. "There is knowledge to be obtained." "Oh, about your lost flesh?" "Perhaps, but potentially intriguing knowledge regardless." Nerton thought for a moment. "Fine, I'll hold off the challenge for now. May we double our usual bet, though?" "Of course," Larry nodded. "I will want your rarest matching tibia and fibula." "Fine by me. I'll be wanting your mandible and sternum." Larry chuckled and reached into his satchel while the rest of us shared concerned glances. He pulled out the tablets and then offered them to Viren. The archfey looked confused for a moment, glanced at its hands, then sighed. The light surrounding Viren disappeared as it opened its eyes, grabbed the tablets, and began its examination. Its demeanor made a subtle shift from perturbed to alarmed, then carefully neutral. Before I could ask why, it cleared its throat and looked back to Larry. "What language do you need these deciphered into?" Viren asked. "They are written in code," the lich replied. "I am aware," the archfey replied testily. "What language do you need?" Larry turned to me inquisitively. "Can you decipher them into English?" I asked. Both the archfey and the bonefey visibly winced at my question. "Oh, sorry," I apologized instinctively. "What's—" "Yes, I can decipher them into their original language," Viren interrupted me. "Wait here, I'll return soon. You'll be safe from the rain in this clearing." Viren disappeared with a pop, and Nerton regarded us nervously. His gaze fell on me more than the others. "I'm going to take my leave as well," the bone fay said. "We'll duel some other time, old friend." "Very well," Larry nodded. Nerton turned and walked away from us at a brisk pace. Several questions seemed to hang in the air, but nobody said anything. I contemplated the behavior of both Fae. Why did they flinch when I said English? How did Viren know the tablet was encoded? How did it even know what English is? "Well, would you look at that?" Rebis pointed above us, interrupting my thoughts. "It really is raining." "Gods damn it," Nash muttered. Chapter 72.5 Master Vampire Kirin Yeth, Adventurer Level NA. Drow Master Vampire Balushenian. Well, well, well. This is a surprising result, the Void whispered. "What is? What's happening?" I demanded. "The others have conferred. A decision has been reached." "And what was there?" My eyes snapped open, and I gasped involuntarily as pain shrieked through my body. The smell of burnt flesh stung my nostrils. I tried to stand, but remained firmly on my back, as if my limbs would not heed my commands. "You sure we can't eat?" someone asked. "No, bad meats. Smell it. We gots to burn it," someone else said. Recognition of these speech patterns tickled at my mind, but the pain prevented cognizance. "What is the meaning of this?" I shouted as I once again tried and failed to move. "Ah, it living!" "So? It can't hurt you, scaredy scales. Keep cuttin'." I contorted my neck to look around and saw a few kobolds standing around roaring fire. A kobold with a short sword began to approach me as another threw a severed leg into the fire. I glanced down and realized with horror that I didn't have any arms, and the leg that just went into the fire was probably my own. "No!" I screamed. A blinding pain rippled through me as the sword bit into my torso, slicing away precious flesh. Regenerate. I have to buy time to regenerate. The dryness I felt in my mouth grew more intense as I focused on trying to regrow my limbs. "Please," I whimpered. "Stop. I'll just go. I'll—" "Nope," a kobold interrupted me. "You hurt the Lord. If you live, you might do it again. Oh, plus, you killed my friends and family." Yeah, that wasn't a very nice thing to do to Simeth. "Bad sucker," the kobold with a sword said as it threw another piece of me into the flames. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'll never hurt anyone again. I lied. Just, please, stop. The sword plunged into my flesh once more. The kobolds chuckled cruelly at my screams. Think he's small enough yet? One of them asked. Please, I begged hoarsely. Yeah, another one replied, but let's chop the head first. Still has sharp teeth to bite with. No, I can give you things. I can... My words turned into a gurgle as the blade carved its way into my throat, soaring back and forth. I desperately tried to bite at the kobold, but the muscles in my neck wouldn't bring my head around. I felt the sword crack the bones in my neck and tried to scream, but could only flap my mouth in response to the pain. A hand grabbed my hair and lifted me into the air, giving me a view of my mutilated body. All that was left of me was my barely recognizable chest. I had only been able to regenerate the stumps of my shoulders. The kobold who grabbed my head began to walk toward the fire. Make sure all the meats go into the fire, the one carrying me said, otherwise the sucker will grow back. What about the leakings? Granny said that they need their meats to come back. The blood's fine where it is. But the Lord will want it cleaned. Then we'll cleanse it, for the Lord. For the Lord. The reality of my situation finally sunk in as the kobold wound up to throw me. I'm going to die. I finally found the power I've wanted for so long, the power to make things the way they should be, and now I'm going to die. It's not right. It's not fair. I experienced a brief moment of weightlessness and panic before I impacted amongst the flames. Intense pain was all I could feel, and the only thing I could hear over the roar of the fire was the sound of my skin sizzling. All I could see were flames licking at my face before my eyes melted in my skull. I longed for the end to finally come while I silently screamed, cursing my mother and father, the vampires, the inbred bastard king, the orcs, the adventurers, and even the gods. Everyone that led me to this fate. Then the pain ebbed and the void returned. A sickening laughter echoed within my mind. Confusion and anger whirled within me. What? Am I dead? I asked. Is this the afterlife? No. What you have just experienced is the fate that you have been spared by the mercy of those higher than you, the wicked god answered, though that mercy wears thin. There were many who craved your demise, and you were only spared by one vote. One vote? Indeed, out of the dozens of votes that were cast, one singular vote defined the majority and spared your middling existence. Middling? I demanded as my anger flared. Quite. You acted haughtily, under the mistaken impression that by becoming a master vampire, you had also become supremely powerful. You were warned that a challenge was coming and failed to take any reasonable precautions, thereby failing the challenge entirely. You didn't even manage to actually kill any of your opponents. I have been an immeasurable disappointment. Thus far, you've been nothing more than a failure, and those are extraordinarily common. There isn't anything spectacular about a failure. We expected far better from one who dares to hold ambitions to conquer the world. The words tore into me, exposing the inadequacies and insecurities that I'd buried deep within. There was nothing that I could think of in reply, no argument that I could make. Even now, as I mentally revisit the fight, I can see the mistakes I made. Stupid and foolish mistakes that I should have been smart enough to avoid. Yes, you shouldn't have sent your minions into a choke point, limiting their superior maneuverability and simultaneously leaving you undefended. You should have been less cautious in expanding your forces. You should have this, you should have that, it said impatiently, but you didn't. We expected strategy, not stupidity. We expected brutality, not cowardice. Your fear of failure ensured it. I found myself unable to be angry at these words, even as they bit into me. Though the tone was condescending, it was a well-deserved chiding. I should have been smarter, should have taken this more seriously. To hells with the gods and their challenges, this was my life that I threw away with my stupid mistakes. What now? I asked, my ego completely deflated. In accordance with the compact of the highest one, you will be spared and I will speed up your regeneration. From there, do as you will. Perhaps your homeland will be more accommodating to a failure such as yourself. The god laughed cruelly. Perhaps you'll even learn the secrets that the other vampires have kept from you, and we'll get to see how those secrets shape you. Or perhaps you'll stumble yet again and die a pathetic death. We will be silent to you from now on, and we will not intercede on your behalf again. Begone. My eyes snapped open, and I gasped involuntarily as the shock of what had happened ran through my mind. I scrambled to a sitting position, breathing heavily and checking to make certain that I was intact. Tears ran down my face as I gripped my arms and legs, the memories of my demise still fresh. The cold of the dungeon floor barely registered upon my nude form, but the sound of padded feet and chattering coming from the entrance hall sent a chill down my spine. Kobolds. Conflicting thoughts surged to the front of my consciousness. Fight or flight? I've killed several dozen kobolds thus far, and that was before I became a master. It would be a simple matter to kill more of them, and it would make me feel better about the trauma I had just endured. They wouldn't stand a chance, but if I kill the kobolds, it will broadcast my survival if the adventurers return to this dungeon. There had been a kobold that had accompanied the adventurers. If the same kobold is with this group and I kill it, they may hunt me down. The murder of a companion, pet or otherwise, is the perfect motivation for revenge. I decided that leaving would be the wisest choice and scrambled to my feet. After a moment of stumbling, I fled deeper into the dungeon. I grabbed a robe and cloak, threw them on, and jogged through the rear exit of the dungeon and into the dilapidated manor. The sun shone upon my face through a hole in the roof, and I gratefully breathed in the outside air. Mindful of my appearance, I concentrated until I felt my face shift into the visage of Habis. The homeless elf would serve me one last time as my mask. Carefully noting that the adventurers may have committed this face to memory, I decided to find a new one as soon as possible. With this ability, though, I will have no trouble gathering intelligence on what is happening within the Night Kingdom. Assuming anyone knows, that is. With one more deep breath, I raised the hood of my cloak and left the manor behind. Chapter 73. Nick Smith, Adventurer. Level 7, Human American. We watched the rain smash itself against whatever was protecting the clearing. It was torrential, covering the entirety of the otherwise invisible barrier, and I didn't look forward to leaving once our business was done. We'd be soaked for the rest of the day, at least. So if you had to liken it to another smell, what would you say it smells like? Rebus asked. The rain? I asked. Yeah. I thought about it for a moment. There's two smells. The one before it rains, which smells kind of like clear air and fresh water mixed together. I'd call it crispy and cold, but the cold isn't a temperature thing. More of a feeling. Right. No, I think I get it. And the other smell? Well, that's the smell that you get after the rain. Kind of smells different from place to place, but it's like the smell you get from opening a water skin on a hot and dry day. Like moist, but in a good way. I wonder if this is a distinction between humans and Mer, or if it's a cultural distinction, Yulk said. Well, I read on internet that there were people who can't smell the rain, I shrugged. So maybe it's depending on where you live. Why would you even need to smell rain anyway? Nash asked grumpily. What purpose does that serve? I shrugged again. Never really gave it any thought, if I'm honest. But if our current circumstances were slightly different, then I guess it would have come in handy. I guess being able to tell it's going to rain without seeing the sky comes in handy when you spend most of your time indoors, I replied. So you know not to go outside unprepared. Wait. What's the internet? Gally asked. Did you do a lot of fishing back in your world or something? The thought of catching fish with computer cables made me chuckle, but I proceeded to explain the internet to the best of my abilities. Yulk and Nash nodded along because they'd heard it before, but the others were absolutely enraptured. For fun, I threw in a couple of funny metaphors, like how we tricked rocks into thinking and we shoot electricity at each other through stretched-out pieces of metal and glass. I find your society fascinating, Larry said once I finished. The thought of creating such things without magical assistance is mind-boggling. Well, we had a saying back home, any sufficiently advanced technology might as well be equivalent to magic, I recited. I guess whoever said that didn't imagine a place like this existing, though. Perhaps, Yulk interjected. Though magic isn't exactly unknown, it has rules and structure to it, just like the technology you describe. When one takes into account the Kuraguard, one could claim that the very essence of magic is technological in nature, just a technology that mortals are unfamiliar with. I'd love to know exactly what the Kuraguard is, I said. Like we told you, nobody really knows. Unless… Nash looked at Larry. No, not even I know much about it. The Lich shook his skull. There are many that assume it is a higher being that is allowed direct interaction with mortals, and provides them with boons based on how accomplished that mortal becomes. Though my limited interactions with it have led me to believe that it isn't alive. Perhaps it is a remnant of the ancient civilization that created the steel golems that we've found in dungeons. A pang of nervousness grew in my stomach. Higher beings, the ones that are watching me for the sake of their entertainment. Is the Kuraguard really one of them? Or maybe a machine designed by them? I know that I rely on it for my spells, but are my skills also part of whatever system it's part of? Can they just pull the plug if I'm not amusing enough? We've discovered some literature in one of those dungeons that indicate that the golems are actually machines, Yulk added. They aren't magical in nature, they are based on forgecraft. Truly? How interesting, Larry rubbed his jaw. If it isn't magical in nature, then anyone could make one. Yes. Probably not. It takes an understanding of things that will likely elude us for quite some time, Yulk sighed. The documents that were discovered described how to forge the metal plating and how to arrange the innards, but not what the innards are made of. I see. Probably wires and a battery, I added. Power storage, Yulk asked. So they do use magic? No, batteries use acids to create an electrical charge, I think. The electricity flows through the wires and causes the parts to move. It's a bit above my knowledge level, I admitted. There's different things that limit the amount of electricity that move through different parts, which cause them to move differently, somehow. Yulk and Larry fell deep into thought. Before any follow-up questions could be asked, though, a soft pop sounded from behind us. A grumpy Fae holding several stone tablets regarded us coldly. The deciphering is complete, Vian said. I've altered the tablets accordingly. Thank you, Larry said, rising to collect the tablets. I stood as well and walked over. My heart began to beat faster and faster with each step I took. Would this be it? Will I finally figure out how to get home? Larry handed me the first tablet, and I began to read. I am Mikael Rodriguez, and I have been given this journal to document my experiments. With everyone waiting patiently, I read the passage aloud. My heart felt as if it was going to burst. The person who wrote this was human, I'm certain of it. All of the odd names I've heard so far, and not a single one of them was even close to the ones I knew. Plus, it was originally in English. Well, what else does it say? Rebis asked. I cleared my throat and continued. To comply with project security, I will be using a Visionnaire cipher which will shift every entry. The keys will be documented elsewhere, as appropriate. I have just been revived from stasis and do not know the current date. I've created a rudimentary calendar that I will use to mark progress. This is the first day's entry, or pre-entry if you will. A Visionnaire cipher? I asked the Archfey. Was that difficult to… Of course it was. I couldn't even do it without the keys. Vian crossed their arms. I had to take out some rather inconvenient debt to obtain that knowledge. Now read. Okay, sorry. Day 1. My revival went without any serious issues. The minor issues were simply a discomfort and confusion which should not have occurred. The pod I had been sleeping in has been adjusted. There are no answers for who adjusted the pods, nor how or why. An unfortunate aspect of this modification is that the data in the pods have been wiped. As such, there seems to be no proper way to tell how long we've slept for. All we know is that the modification occurred approximately 4,000 years ago. There are very few of us, and we have little in the way of aid from the local populace. Apparently, they have been exterminating us wherever they can find us. I've been given no explanation for this behavior, and I suspect that the actions of the surviving members of the Malos organization are to blame. I find myself frustrated with these conditions. These people don't seem to know what has happened, or they simply won't tell me. They estimate there are fewer than 1,000 humans that we can rely on at the moment. The pods were supposed to keep us in stasis until we were long forgotten. But something happened 4,000 years ago, and many of us were revived. Each generation revived replacements, and now we're here. Hardly any of us left, and with a mountain of things we need to do to secure our future. First, we need to find a way to perform extra-dimensional travel. Next, we need to revive and gather the remaining humans. Finally, we need to escape from here. This is not our home. The research required of me is odd. Demons and angels, or demons and Enniels if you use the local parlance, have knowledge of portals that we require. There have been several instances of extra-dimensional invasion, though typically on a small scale. We need to find out how they are able to pierce the fabric of reality. Well, that's ominous, Rebus laughed. This is the cult, right? The ones that caused the demon invasion? Guess they figured it out. Keep reading, Vian said coldly. Day 4. Today I received my first batch of test subjects and began my research. Dwarves and elves that have been living near an entry point for the previous demonic invasion. A tear in the fabric of reality. We have a lot of data on baselines for these species, and given what I have to do to these subjects, I doubt that I want to know how we got that data. I have another journal for the raw findings themselves, but even a cursory vivisection reveals mutations. These tears in the fabric of reality actually impact the surrounding environment. This provides a reasonable explanation for the monsters that one encounters on the surface fairly regularly, but we haven't been able to find any sort of measurable radiation emanating from the tears. Day 9. The previous days were much the same as my previous entry, cutting, carving, studying. Before all this happened, I would have been sickened by what I'm doing. I suppose on some level I still am, but not in the way that I should be. Poetic, that I should have to set aside my humanity to save humanity. The Malos organization keeps bringing me test subjects, and I keep testing on these subjects. My findings are slim, though. There are mutations, but I can find no hints as to what exactly is causing them. At first, I suspected cancer, but biopsies reveal that the mutations don't contain cancerous cells. They are perfectly functional, just anomalous. A muscle split into two, extra organs, extra sets of teeth. Even the brain is subject to these oddities. One thing the mutations have in common is that they rarely impact the subject's quality of life. Day 15. We have had to move. Our location was discovered by the locals, and they immediately mobilized an armed force to eradicate us. Thankfully, the Malos organization was well prepared for this eventuality and had plenty of sympathizers in the nearby city. The move was inconvenient, but otherwise uneventful. The new location is more cramped, though. No new discoveries have been made. Day 22. A sorcerer nearby has created an object that can detect magic. Specifically, the emissions created by the use of spells. This revelation led to a discussion which revealed that my anatomy has been altered to include an artificial magic core and everything else necessary to cast magic. My demands for further information were met with callous shrugs. Either they don't know who did this to me, or they aren't going to tell me. Returning to the aforementioned device, Dr. Samuels is working on reverse engineering it. My talents for engineering are slim to none, so I can't really help her. That's a shame, as I would like an excuse to get closer to her. It would be nice to have companionship, perhaps even a lover, but that's just a pipe dream. My work is far too gruesome for anyone to be able to forgive me for it, let alone look past it. Worst yet, it hasn't resulted in any new revelations. Day 42. I have been neglecting my journal, mostly because nothing interesting has been happening. Today, however, Dr. Samuels finished her project. Tomorrow we will see what we can find out. I am hoping for a breakthrough. Day 43. The radiation from the tears is now confirmed to be magical. From what we have been able to find, there are two types of magic, Type 1 and Type 2, T1 and T2. T1 magic is emitted by the environment, trees, rocks, etc. T2 magic is emitted by creatures that have a magical core. How either magic is produced is unknown. This device can detect this magic and determine which type of magic it is. The tears are radiating T2 magic. When someone casts a spell, We get a reading that is a mixture of T1 and T2 magic, T3 magic. What is coming from the tears is pure T2 though. The significance of this is currently unknown. Day 47. The mutations radiate T2 magic. The experiment was difficult to set up. Had to create a life support system for various organs without using magic. In a world that is nearly devoid of technology. Should get a Nobel Prize for this accomplishment, but the confirmation of my hypothesis is good enough for now. The mutations continue to generate T2 magical emissions even after the host has perished, but stop once the organ is damaged beyond repair. If we ever need to generate T2 magic, this knowledge could become useful. Now, though, all it does is point me in a direction. We still need to know how to manipulate the tears. To do this, we may need to know more about T2 magic. All we have left is a handful of elves. Going to need more to learn more. Ithrima threw up. She had been looking queasy, but the final entry tipped the scales for her. Mako comforted her as she struggled to regain control of her stomach. "Gods, that's terrible," Haino said, "carving people up like that." "Yeah," I said softly. "Read," Vian said angrily, becoming more irritable by the second. Day 55. Dr. Samuels is dead. The autopsy was grim. I concluded that her cause of death was acute kidney injury, caused by dehydration from food poisoning that she failed to report and get treatment for. It must have been painful. The bacteria that killed her is unfamiliar, but should have been treatable with fluoroquinolones or ampicillin. We have plenty of antibiotics, so her death was completely avoidable. Confirming her cause of death was just as much of a shock as her death itself. She should have known better. I would like to mourn her, but I don't actually miss her. The part of me that would miss her died long before she did. Plus, we don't have any booze. Day 67. I have discovered a method of causing a magical core to radiate T2 magical energy. Unfortunately, this radiation is a mere fraction of what is being emitted by the tears. The tears emit roughly 200 times more magic. Day 69. Introducing a radiating magical core to a tear did nothing, as suspected. Day 84. Introducing 50 radiating magical cores to a tear did nothing. Day 85. Argued with leadership today. They wanted to try 100 radiating cores, massive waste of resources, unlikely to produce any measurable results. Not to mention the cost in lives, which I didn't. Pointing out that 100 subjects would have to die to do that would have probably convinced them to move forward with the stupid idea. At first, I thought the plan was to escape from here, but now I think there's a more sinister endgame at play. Day 91. A demon has been captured. It has been interrogated, but the results of that are being kept from me. My job is to examine their physiology. Demons heal a lot better than elves and dwarves do. "Gods," Rebus said in disgust. "This guy's fucked up," I replied. "Not all humans are like this, I promise." "No worries, Nick," Gally said. "We don't know you all that well, but we can tell you're not like this Mikael guy." "It is interesting to listen to someone go from academic to monster," Yulk said, "though a little nauseating." A loud snap rang through the air, causing all of us to jump. Vern looked at us angrily. "Nick," the Archfey growled, "we do not have much time. Read, now before you lose this chance." Chapter 74. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 7, Human American. Dumbfounded, I met Vian's angry stare. "What's the rush? Did something happen? What's going on?" It's probably stupid to ask, though. I turned my attention back to the tablets and began to read again. Day 94. The demon emits T2 magical energy by default, a significant amount of it, much more than the elves or dwarves do. It's possible this is why the tear is radiating this type of magic. Further experimentation is required. Demon physiology is fascinating. Organs shift in their purposes as others are removed, and shift back once they regrow. Not certain if this is the case for all demons, but this thing is made to survive. Very useful for my purposes. Day 96. It spoke to me today. Threats, of course, but the fact that it was able to learn English to do so is pretty incredible. It looks like a simple beast with a vaguely humanoid form, But there's a cunning intellect in there. It's a shame that I don't have the luxury of experimenting with its intelligence. Day 101. My research has allowed the Malus organization to discover a method of summoning a demon. Essentially, a miniature tear in this reality is formed, and a demonic presence is pulled through by force. It's outside of my expertise. I informed the leaders of the fact that I have no need of a second demon at the moment, and explained that demons seem to be strong enough to be a risk, so it's best to leave it be for now. They listened for now. Day 103. The demon died today. The timing is very suspicious. It is also of concern that I can't seem to pin down the cause of death. I think that someone killed it, likely to force the issue of a summoning ritual. Or I'm being paranoid and it simply passed due to having too many of its organs removed at once. It continued to radiate T2 magic for 3 hours after its death. Unlike with the elves and dwarves, though, its organs stopped emitting the magic even while on life support. The significance of this is unclear. Day 104. The ritual was performed today and required 3 sacrifices. Orcs were used because of their large amount of blood. The demon was successfully summoned and subdued. I'm still combing over the cadavers of the orcs to see if their use in the ritual affected their physical makeup. Writing this while eating lunch. Veggie sandwich. Meat that didn't used to be sapient is difficult to come by, and I refuse to allow myself to sink that low. Lunch is done. The orc's physiology remained unchanged. More importantly, the new demon also speaks English. Shared knowledge. Or did it have previous exposure to our language somehow? The only things it will tell me are what it wants to do with my skin and organs. Perhaps I will take some of its recommendations to heart with my experiments. Day 107. Comparing demon organs to mer organs has led to some fascinating discoveries. While transplanting organs between the different mer species results in immediate rejection, transplantation of demonic organs into mer is possible. Rejection is still an issue, but it can be mitigated with immunosuppressants. Day 108. Confirmed benefits of demonic organ transplant in elves. Faster overall healing. Not as fast as a demon, but much faster than should be possible with elven metabolism and physiology. More potent magical potential. Average storage increase of 47% detected in the magic core of hosts. These are initial results. We're still a ways away from human testing. Fucking hells, Rebus muttered. Even my stomach's starting to roil. I gave him a sympathetic look. No more interruptions, Vian growled. This is important. Read. Day 113. Over the course of the last few days, security forces have been taking the demon for interrogation without explanation. Today, it escaped while being transported from my lab. Instead of trying to flee, it began killing everyone it came across. I heard the screams and knew what happened. I locked the door to my lab and sat there, waiting to see what would happen. Should have I been afraid? The screaming and shouting were getting closer, but that could have been my imagination. Why wasn't I afraid? Security managed to kill the thing before it got to my lab. In total, it killed 18 people. Mostly civilians, if such a thing even exists anymore. Still, it's a significant impact on our current population. I envy them. Day 117. A new demon has been summoned, and additional precautions have been taken. Experimentation will continue. Day 120. The tears are beginning to radiate more T2 magic than before. Could this be because of the summonings? That doesn't make sense. We didn't see a measurable difference after the first one. Why would a second one make this kind of impact? Is this unrelated? Day 121. I've confirmed that more summonings have taken place, more radiation is coming from the tears, and the amount is still increasing. A meeting was held to discuss this, and it was revealed that almost every Malus site has a demon captive. However, the increase of radiation didn't occur in concurrence with the summonings. As a result, we've concluded that the demons are likely to invade soon. We've decided against warning the mer. Even with my experiments, they've killed far more of us than we have of them. I don't know whether we deserved such treatment or not, but said treatment has decided their fate. Perhaps our own as well. Day 122. I haven't slept. Been running every experiment I can think of to learn as much as we can. Any sort of weakness we can take advantage of, and how to control the goddamn tears. Nothing, though. No eureka moments, no breakthroughs, 122 days, and barely anything to show for it. All of us have been armed in preparation for the demonic invasion. I've been given an M18 semi-automatic pistol and 2 magazines of 9mm ammunition. Never thought I'd see a gun again. Hope it works. Day 125. Well, the gun bought me some time at least. The demons have invaded. Malos' sights began going dark almost immediately. It didn't take us long to figure out that they were tracking their captured comrades. Unfortunately, this realization came too late. The demons have all but annihilated our security forces. The last bits are holding out as I write this. We're going to evacuate, try to make it to the ocean. Might find shelter to the south. That's it, I said. Guess they didn't make it out, Gali muttered. Nah, they might have, Rebis said, glancing at me sympathetically. Maybe they just left their notes behind because they were in a hurry. Either scenario is possible, Larry said. However, it is extremely unlikely for a mortal to have survived this long. Though it's not as if I know how long humans live. Going to be honest, I hope he died a painful death, Ithrima said. I stared at the tablet, a mixture of anger and anguish fighting for dominance within me. This barely answered any of my questions. Woke up a dragon, traveled across 2 countries, fought a bunch of vampires and monsters, and this is what I get out of it. A journal written by a monster disguised as a human that I had to read aloud to everyone. This was supposed to be a clue? To what? Where do we go from here? I looked up at Vern. Its face stopped me cold. The only one here madder than me was the Archfey. Enough, Vern shouted. We don't have time for this. What is the matter, friend? Larry asked. The Archfey rounded on the lich with its teeth bared. Friend, you have no idea what this cost, it growled. I wouldn't have agreed to help you if I had known. You should owe me a favor. What did... Don't bother asking, Vern sighed. You should know better than that by now. I can only reveal what I am meant to reveal in order to fulfill my newfound obligations. What's going on? I asked. What obligations? You, fuck you, Vern shouted at me. Who the hell do you think you are? Hiding the fact that you're a... Vern's eyes rolled into the back of its head for a few seconds. Yulk and Larry moved forward to help, but the Archfey quickly recovered and waved them off. Fine, it shouted. Fine, I get it. Nick, Nash, Yulk. I'm going to teleport you 3 to the deep wild forest. You've only been here for about a week, so... A week? Nash demanded. Impossible. How can it have been a week already? Gali asked. I don't owe you any kind of Vern cut off as its eyes rolled back again. Vern, are you okay? Larry asked. Yes, I'm fine. Stop asking questions, you measly fucks, Vern said once it recovered. Apparently, I do owe you an explanation. But we're pressed for time. The area surrounding this clearing is under my protection. Once I realized the intensity of the task, I applied a time dilation magic to my protection that slowed down time for you while it passed normally outside of this clearing. Then I got to work, while you didn't starve to death or wander off. What about the rain? Yulk asked, staring at the torrent raging above us. Surely the land outside this clearing would have flooded by now. A simple glamour, Vern answered dismissively. I guessed that you would be concerned by the obvious passage of time. Watching the sun rise and set faster than normal tends to cause mortals some distress. Yeah, that would have been freaky, Mako agreed. Back on topic, you 3 are needed in Deep Wild. They're under attack, and you are duty-bound to assist. Vern turned back to Nash, Yulk, and I. Duty-bound? I asked. Yes. You are friends with the Deep Wilder. Being friends with the Fairfolk means that they are obligated to help when you ask them to, and you are obligated to help them when they ask you to. They asked for my help. Well, Vern paused for a moment. I can't go into detail, but something else has asked on their behalf. I'm sure you know my meaning. In exchange for making certain that you get to Deep Wild Forest in a timely manner, they granted me the keywords needed to decipher the tablets. So, even if I say no... You don't get to say no, Vern said sternly. What about the rest of you? You're welcome to accompany them. Though my curiosity burns, I'm afraid I cannot. Larry said. I have obligations toward the kobolds in my dungeon. Can we? Rebis asked Gali. No, Gali sighed. If we don't report back, a kill team is going to be sent into the dungeon. Hells, they might already be on their way. Don't want Symeth and Larry to get hurt. Ah, fuck, you're right, Rebis muttered. Then it is settled. Say your farewells, Vian said. Be quick. We gathered around each other, shaking hands and wishing each other luck. I thanked each of them for their help. Then Yulk and Larry shook hands and whispered to each other for a few moments. Yulk and Larry strode over to the tablets that I had left on the ground. Yulk dug around in his pack while Larry spread the tablets out. After a few more moments, it was clear that Yulk was making a charcoal rubbing of the tablets. I did say be quick, yes, Vian demanded, tapping its foot impatiently. Then you must consider it quite convenient that I am already finished, Yulk said with a smile. The Archfey paused for a moment. Whatever, let's get this done. All three of you need to be touching. You can hold hands or put your hands on each other's shoulder or whatever you want. Vian waved its hands urgently, rushing us together. Send word of your travels, Haino said as gathered. We'll make sure Larry stays informed too. Oh, you'll be visiting me? Larry asked. Yeah, why not, as long as you're all right with it. Yulk and Nash placed their hands on my shoulders and turned to look at Vian. Yes, of course I'll be fine with it. It's been so long since I had good comp. Vian waved his hand and everything went dark. Chapter 75. Count Alurgus Tuvino. Adventurer level not applicable. Vampire Balashinian. I watched the thralls drag yet another chained Fae into the ritual cage. Part of me was amused, finding a grim satisfaction in the suffering of those who would dare to look down on me. Another much smaller part of me was disturbed by what I was witnessing, though. This magic is wrong, on a fundamental level. The Higher Ones created the first vampires long ago to address the Wilder's newfound ability to sin. A pact made between Wilder and mortal for the sake of a Wilder's redemption and rebirth. The agreements made then are unknowable. None of us can remember them. But the ritual that we're repeatedly performing perverts the intentions of the Higher Ones and forces the pact on both the mortal and the Wilder. I wonder what happens to them if they die, I muttered. They'll likely return to the cycle, Count Heseth said as he nodded for the ritual to proceed. They're pretty much zombies and haven't committed any sin, so they'll probably be reborn as a Wilder. The vampire performing the ritual nodded back, then began to utter words of power as he drew a blade. The drow that was chained to the altar began to scream and beg as the blade rose. The Fae started to convulse as the words struck it. The final word of power struck the Fae as the blade fell into the drow's heart. And what if they aren't? I asked. The vampire withdrew the dagger from the drow, and, unseen to us, the essence of the Fae was drawn out of its flesh and thrust into the now empty vessel laying on the altar. The previous vessel instantly became desiccated and crumpled to the floor of the cage. The drow's eyes, which had not yet had a chance to close, flickered to life. Her expression of pain faded into one of apathy, and the hole in her chest healed. A new thrall had been born. That's not something we have to worry about, so long as Duke Misgiel's plan works. Heseth shrugged. Right, I half-heartedly agreed. The Duke was very educated in the matters of the arcane. After less than a day of performing the rituals, he managed to find a way to allow someone else to perform them in his stead. After 3 days, he had found a way to perform multiple rituals at once. We were well on our way to fortifying our ranks. There was a cost, though. The Wilder were viscous in their resistance. We had lost dozens of brood with each round of fighting. A single vampire is worth at least 10 brood, though, so we've made an overall profit from this venture. And it isn't as if we can't make more brood. I'm going to attend to the Duke, I said. Be well, Heseth nodded. I made my way through our encampment, trying to avoid the eyes of all the caged Wilder. The derision in their gaze makes my blood boil, and I don't trust myself not to react. While ripping them to shreds would feel great, we'll need as many of them as possible to retake our rightful place. A series of grandiose tents came into view. The Duke's new quarters weren't quite as fine as the old guild hall, but they were still much better than my own. Perhaps if I manage to make myself useful, I'll be granted a larger tent. One large enough to hold a table would be wondrous. Hold, the guard stopped me, then turned toward the inside of the tent. It's Count Tuvino. Let him pass, a gruff voice from within said. The guard stepped aside and saluted as I strode past him into the tent. The now familiar bustle of activity greeted me, teetering on the verge of overwhelming. Various lackeys ran between tables, holding various documents and other materials. Duke Misil stood in the midst of the crowd, easily a head taller than everyone else. The Duke glanced up from the war table and immediately spotted me. He waved me over, and I made my way through the chaos, taking my spot at the other side of the table. The war map was covered in tokens, and very little of it made any sense to me. "Good morning, Count," Misil said as he moved one of the tokens. "I trust you are well?" "Yes, Your Grace," I bowed. "My lieutenants are prepared for the day's activities." "Excellent. We've made good progress thus far, and your forces have been particularly fortunate. Hardly any casualties. Good work," he nodded absent-mindedly. "Unfortunately, that's liable to change soon." "For what cause?" "The damned archfey. This forest has more of them than it should. We've been able to outmaneuver them thus far, but it seems they've finally come up with a strategy that has slowed our progress immensely." A snarl crossed over my face, but I recovered before the Duke noticed. "I despise the bastards. Archfey are arbitrarily chosen to wield immense power. It's given to them regardless of whether or not it's actually deserved. Their destructive capabilities are difficult to match, but like everything else, they have weaknesses. Most of them are physically meager, as if they sacrifice their physical strength for enormous magical potency. If one could get close enough, it would be a simple matter to tear them into pieces. Getting close is the difficult part, though. Their half-existence gives them a view of the world that makes it all but impossible to sneak up on them. Furthermore, they are reborn much faster than other wilder are. Even if you get lucky and manage to kill them, they'll be back before you can escape. Swarming them wouldn't work either. Their specialty is large-scale attacks. Fire, wind, and ice destroying everything within a broad area is their favorite tactic. One could say that it's difficult for them to wield their powers without collateral damage." "That's it," I exclaimed. "Pardon?" Misil asked. "The Archfey specialize in magic that has a wide area of effect. They would struggle to strike an individual target. And we use some of the captured wilder as meat shields." Duke Misil opened his mouth as if to dismiss my idea, but the words paused in his throat. "I doubt they'll be willing to fall just to drive us off," I grinned. "One of the most grievous sins a wilder can commit, the one which I was held responsible for, is killing a fellow wilder outside of an established duel. Whether the kill is accidental or intentional, the punishment is the same. If the Archfey destroy our meat shields, they will become vampires when next they perish." "That is an inspired plan, Count," Misil grinned. "I agree," a hauntingly familiar voice said. I noticed the silence that had fallen over the tent just before an immense pressure gripped my mind. The Duke and I locked eyes, and I could tell that he felt it as well. Leaning on the table to steady myself, I turned to see who had spoke. "Hello again, Alurgas," Kirin sneered at me. The shock of the situation numbed my mind. Kirin should be dead. But he's here, and he smells different, stronger. He's not a half-breed anymore. Somehow he's become a vampire. No, a master vampire. Impossible, but it's happened. "How?" I managed to gasp. "How? How did I survive? How did I get here?" "Or are you asking how I became a master vampire?" Kirin replied gleefully. "Yes." His laughter echoed through my mind. "Well, when I realized the battle was lost, I followed some timely advice and fled into the land of the dwarves. As for how I became a master, well, I had a little snack," Kirin chuckled. "Then I came here. On foot. Vampires can run quite fast, and masters run even faster. I actually would have arrived sooner, but I had to make some detours to find out what was going on. And to feed, of course." "How dare you?" Misil growled. "How dare I? How dare you? Resisting a master vampire's influence isn't something a normal vampire can do." Kirin walked over to the Duke. "You've been naughty. No, despicable is a better word for it. What kind of terrible, terrible things have you done to yourself?" Duke Misil raised a clawed hand toward Kirin's throat. The failed strategist casually watched the hand approach him, then laughed as it fell. No, this unfortunately unacceptable. We're going to have to undo your little modifications, he said. It's a shame. You'd be useful as you are if I could trust you to obey. I'll never, Misil gasped. You can't. Can't. Can't what? Undo what you've done to yourself? Kirin grabbed Misil by the nape and slammed his head onto the table. If I couldn't, I would simply kill you. Kirin's voice ran cold. You managed to save yourself, though. You see, when I was looking for you, I ran into some of your servants. After some persuasion, they told me that you had fled your den in a rush, that you'd left behind a lot of riches and research. I've always been oh so curious, so with some more persuasion I got them to tell me where your den is. The thick table creaked as Kirin pressed harder. Not to worry, though. Their disloyalty was punished in the end. I was hungry, you see. Kirin lifted the Duke's head and brought it down once more. I'm talking, Misil, Kirin growled. Now where was I? Oh yes, I paid your den a visit. Found your research. It was quite illuminating. You were interesting in so many things. Rituals, physical and magical augmentation, and even reversing aforementioned augmentation. The idea that one of your servants might use your augmentations for themselves led to you creating a cure for them. Rather insightful of you. Kirin removed a syringe from his cloak. The needle tipping the syringe glistened menacingly. I tried to move, to stop him, but my body felt as if it were made of stone. I was helpless as Kirin plunged the needle into Misil's neck. And now your life is saved, Kirin laughed, assuming you survived this. The Duke went limp and fell to the floor. I couldn't move to get a better view, but I could see his legs twitching erratically. A seizure, probably. I wanted to glare at Kirin, but my face regarded him without emotion. I wonder what will happen to the thralls if he dies, Kirin casually pondered. Misil's movements only lasted a moment more. Once he was still again, Kirin examined him. Guess we will have to wait to find out, he said, kicking the Duke's foot. Get up. A creature that was much smaller than the Duke rose and took a place at the table. No longer did Misil tower over other vampires, and his previously impressive musculature was now barely clinging to his bones. A sick part of my mind noted that he looks more like the other Dukes. Good, now let us discuss how we are going to handle the current situation, Kirin said. First, I was bluffing. I don't know why Alurgas's plan is inspired. Explain to me why the Archfey wouldn't simply eradicate the meat shields along with our troops. His eyes locked onto mine as he finished speaking, and suddenly my own voice was filling the air. Except I wasn't speaking. My mouth was speaking on its own. Powerless to stop myself, I explained everything. Each follow-up question prompted more and more explanations out of me. It was then I realized that I was no longer in control of my body. A small piece of me was now controlling my body, acting on the whim of the former half-breed. I see, he said. I suspected as much, given the Duke's research notes, but it's nice to have it confirmed. So if I die, I become a vampire again, and so will all of you. I can see why this was kept from me. You would have had to promise me much more to keep me in line. Kirin absent-mindedly moved some pieces around on the table for a moment. Okay, here's what we'll do. We'll spread the meat shields throughout our ranks, providing optimal protection against the Archfey's attacks. The further we spread them, the more we can use in the rituals. This should drive the Archfey back and urge them to send the other Wilder into battle. Then it's business as usual. Objections? Silence. Right, of course not. Even if we succeed in bolstering our forces here, we won't be able to take the Night Kingdom yet. The orcs have taken the capital and fortified the walls. So the next step in our plan will be to press into the unified chiefdoms and convert as many orcs as possible to further bolster our forces. While we do this, we should send a detachment of brood to attack the orcish armies as a distraction. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Actually, we may want to do that beforehand. As things stand, they can attack our rear and trap us between their army and the fair folk. We'll keep a close eye on their movements, and if they start to show signs of setting out, we'll send some brood. If they're smart, they'll use the walls to repel our decoy attacks. Once we move into the UC, we won't have to worry about a battle on two fronts, and we can have a proper fight with them. More silence. I wanted to respond, to call him every foul name I've ever heard, but he hadn't asked me a question, and my mouth no longer heeded my commands. Instead, Kirin nodded to himself and turned to everyone else in the tent. See it done. The sounds of activity swelled once more, but different this time. More purposeful, less chaotic. The Duke and I stared at Kirin. Now, Duke Misil, the master vampire smiled maliciously. Tell me how to take the thralls under my command. Chapter 76. Nick Smith, Adventurer. Level 7. Human American. Once the darkness settled over me, I felt as if I was being yanked, like a parent pulling their child out of the way of a car. Before I could consider the irony of that thought, I blinked and was suddenly in a completely different clearing. My senses were assaulted by the difference. Smells, sights, temperature, everything had altered enough to be noticeable. My stomach decided to become an acrobat, and I had to fight to keep it from spewing its contents. Well, that looked unpleasant, someone said. Nash, Yulk and I glanced at each other and turned to look at the person who spoke. Mummeldobran sat on a log that was next to a stump, smoking what looked like a hand-rolled cigarette. It gave us an uncharacteristically merry wave. Nash and Yulk regarded the King of Archfey for a moment, then simultaneously turned and vomited. I fought even harder to keep my food within me. My orc brothers breathed heavy sighs of relief once they were finished. It was unpleasant, yes, Yulk said. So we were. What? Teleported? Nash asked. Felt more like being pulled through time and space, I answered through gritted teeth. Yeah, that's about right, Mummeldobran said. When Wilder do it, we get rid of our bodies first. Flesh doesn't like being pulled through the fair realm. The what? Yulk asked with a sudden interest. Feeling my knees about to give out, I decided to have a seat on the ground to recover. The fair realm, it's where we reside when we're not in physical form. Mummeldobran took a hefty drag from his cigarette. Sort of a giant void where beings of energy, nothingness and somethingness hang out. Has neither space nor time, so it's a pretty convenient way to travel. If you've got the stomach for it. Which we don't, apparently, Nash sighed. Nick, you'll feel better if you just throw up. I'd rather die, I growled. Had spicy food for breakfast. Gonna hurt coming up. Nash and Yulk chuckled. Mummeldobran, on the other hand, giggled. All three of our heads snapped to look at him. What? It asked. You seem to be in much higher spirits than you were when we first met, Yulk said. What's in that smoke? Nash asked with suspicion in his voice. Mummeldobran raised an eyebrow and eyed the cigarette for a moment. It flicked the ash from the end and took another deep drag. It's smokeseed, it said as it inhaled, a somewhat rare fibrous bean-like plant that contains various stimulants, namely caffeine. That sounds kind of like coffee, I added, still struggling with my stomach. Not quite, the Archfey laughed. The various stimulants in smokeseed combine to form a pretty hard punch. A punch that's fatal to most mortals, in fact. Then why's it called smokeseed? Nash asked. That's what we call it, Mummeldobran giggled again. No idea what you call it. Though some of your villages grow it for us. Trade and such. Plants that contain high levels of sugar and caffeine are our primary import. Why? Because we thrive off of these chemicals. Sugar rejuvenates us, like a warm meal and bath do for you. Caffeine has a profound mental impact that allows us to focus in ways that we normally aren't able to accomplish. Very interesting, Yulk nodded. What do you exchange with the unified chiefdoms? Lumber and magical trinkets mostly. We're getting sidetracked. Why are we here? I interrupted a little impatiently. How should I know? Mummeldobran asked, bewildered. Who sent you through the fair realm? Vian? Archfey, about this high? It gestured above its head. Yeah, that's the one. That's weird. Just a second. Mummeldobran's eyes rolled into the back of its head, and it slouched, nearly dropping its cigarette. The rest of us shared a worried glance. I took a few deep breaths and rose to my feet just as Mummeldobran recovered, looking far more sober than it had a moment ago. I see, it muttered. Care to share? I asked. Not really, but I suppose I must. Have a look at the stump. The three of us approached the stump that Mummeldobran was sat next to. As we got closer, we realized that the wood had been carved to look like a forest. Bugs sat patiently on top of the small carvings, as if marking points of interest. "We are being attacked," Mummeldobran puffed at his cigarette. "Vampires." "Vampires? Why?" "I'm unsure, but the screams coming from the Fair Realm indicate something sinister. What I do know is that they're well organized and using captured Wilder as shields." "What's a Wilder?" I asked. "Me and the other fair folk. Essentially anyone who is an intricate part of the cycle of wilds." "Ah," I said, barely understanding the explanation. "Anyway, the use of our comrades as shields is a rather smart move, as it prevents us from using the Archfey to their fullest potential." "Why's that?" Nash asked. "Well, our strength isn't exactly subtle," Mummeldobran chuckled. "By using our powers to kill the brood, we'd be unable to avoid killing the Wilder captives." "You don't want to kill your friends," I said empathically. "What? No, they'd just come back, wouldn't be a problem. The issue is that killing them is considered a sin by the higher ones, meaning that we would be punished for it. If we kill enough of them and the enemy manages to kill us, well, we might end up on their side of this fight." "Ah, yeah, that would be bad," I nodded. "So, why are we here?" "The higher ones pulled a bit of trickery, as they do. You see, I requested help from a certain group of Wilder, which Vian is a part of. This group of Wilder, however, owes my group nothing and is not beholden to our calls for aid. If they were to aid us, we would be in their debt," Mummeldobran explained. "I am fine with this. The other kings are fine with this, but the higher ones dislike us trading favors with each other. One wrong word leads to chaos and such. So they took it upon themselves to interfere and send you instead, since we are beholden to each other." "Yeah, but Vian owed the higher ones a favor. Why didn't they just use that to get them to help you?" "Mortals trading favors owed by others is quite a bewildering concept, if I'm honest. When you owe someone a favor, they are the one that you owe that favor to. No self-respecting Wilder would ever get caught in the web of mental gyrations required to justify having to do something for someone you are not beholden to, because you're beholden to someone else. That's just silly," it giggled. "Plus, I don't think the higher ones wanted them to help us to begin with. They definitely wanted you here, though." "Any idea as to why?" "Nope." Swearing under my breath, I looked at the trunk map. What am I supposed to do? Go and fight an army of vampires? I could definitely take down a few of them, but judging by the number of red bugs on the stump, that would just be a drop water in the ocean. "If you can't use the Archfey, what are you doing instead?" Yulk asked. "Using the lesser Wilder. Don't tell them I called them that." Mummeldobran giggled again. "But there's a problem there, too. The enemy is grabbing our soldiers and using iron to capture them. The various forms of Fey, fairies and such are putting up a fight, but—" "It's not enough," I said flatly. "What sort of formations are you using?" "Formations?" The three of us glanced at each other and then stared at Mummeldobran in disbelief. "Like battle formations? How are your troops sorted?" "Sorted. We're just fighting. So is the enemy, for the most part." "Like a mob?" "What?" I trailed off, thinking. "So it's basically just a large brawl between two groups." "Don't be dismissive. This is a proper war, not some riot." Mummeldobran crossed its arms. "What weapons are your soldiers using?" "Magic for the most part. The Bone and Blood Fae sometimes use swords and spears." "This is a mess," Nash muttered. No offense." "Some taken." Mummeldobran's eyes narrowed. "If you want to turn things around, you're going to need to be more organized," I explained. "If you have groups that use similar weapons, then it's easier to know where to put them to counter the enemy. Since the enemy is trying to kidnap your soldiers, some safeguards should be taken too." "Safeguards?" "Yeah, well, riot shields." "I just told you this isn't a riot." I know. But if the enemy isn't coordinated, then they're basically rioting, right? And the way to counter a riot is with phalanx that uses big shields. It helps control the crowd and keeps your people from getting pulled away from the safety of your group. If your Fae use this tactic, it will protect them as they attack the mob of vampires. Plus, unlike a riot, you don't have to be concerned with whether the mob lives or not. You can use large spears behind such a shield wall, Yulk said. Stick the vampires, and it will be much easier to ignite them. And then you won't have to rely on the archfey, Nash added with a nod. Mummeldobran rubbed its chin. While the king of Archfey thought to itself, I thought about how ridiculous it was that I was teaching riot tactics to a mythical being. I'm not even an expert in the craft. I've just seen a few on TV and wrote a paper on it for social studies. How will they see to aim their spears and spells? The king of Archfey asked. Clear shields would be best, like made of plastic. I trailed off, realizing what I was suggesting. Yulk and Nash gave me a confused look. Well, that's not an option, Mummeldobran laughed. But, yes, I think we can come pretty close to it. A bit of magical manipulation here, a bit of craftsmanship there. You can get your forces in the rear equipped, then trade them with the ones at the front, I suggested. Is there a way to help them get organized? Yes, that won't be an issue. All Wilder can move as one when we have to. It's distasteful, though, but likely necessary to survive the current situation. Good. That will help make sure the Fae don't get dragged away while… I paused, reflecting on how invested in this I was getting. While they take care of the enemy. Before I came here, reading wasn't really my main pastime, and I didn't often choose something from the Isekai genre. But I've read stories about people going back in time and teaching medieval people about modern weapons and tactics. It usually goes pretty well in the stories, but there was one story that stuck out to me. The main character taught some people who were being victimized how to fight using modern tactics, and they eventually defeated the lord that was victimizing them. Then the king of the land issued a warrant for their arrest because they'd broken the law by going against their lord. The MC then taught the people how to make guns, and they defended themselves against the king's soldiers. But the author didn't write it as a power fantasy. The deaths depicted were gruesome, and there was even a scene where one of the king's men begged for his life. He said he had a family, a little girl, but the villagers shot him anyway. Then, at the end of the story, the MC had begun to become tyrannical. The villagers killed him with the guns he taught them how to make. God, look at me. I'm 18 years old, and I'm giving advice to someone on how to wage war while worrying about divulging too much information because of a story I read when I was 16. The absurdity of my new life wasn't anything new to me, and I thought I'd gotten used to weird things happening. But every now and then, this odd feeling of being out of place creeps up on me. You might even be able to recover some of the Fae that have been stolen away. Yulk added. I hope so. This entire fight hasn't sat well with me, Mummeldobran said, extinguishing the cigarette. I would especially like to know what the damned vampires are doing with my kin. They're turning them into vampires, a feminine voice from very close behind me said. Whirling around as quickly as I could, I barely caught a glimpse of what looked like arms before my face was covered in warm, squishy flesh. I struggled both to free myself and to breathe, but the arms were locked around my head like vice grips. Briefly, I considered biting, but decided against it because it might think I'm flirting. So good to see you again, Nick, Tits said. I knew I smelled you. Ptsch, I replied. Tits, let go of the human, Mummeldobran said with an exasperated sigh. With a sad whine, Tits released my head. Gasping, I took a few steps back and eyed the archfey warily. Good, thank you, Mummeldobran continued. So, the fuck? Chapter 77. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 7, Human American. Tits watched me with a pout as I took another step back and wiped what I hoped was her sweat off my face. Mummeldobran waited for Tits' explanation for a moment before clearing their throat. The aggressively flirtatious archfey sighed and turned to Mummeldobran. I got bored, so I decided to spy on the enemy, Tits said. I noticed a bunch of crows on their side of the battlefield, so I disguised myself as one and just flew around a bit. The real crows weren't very nice at all, called me all sorts of names like false wing, decoy, and bitch. But they didn't tell the vampires about me either, so I guess they weren't all that bad. Skip to the part about them turning our kin into vampires, please, Mummeldobran snarled. Patience, I risked my life, you know. Probably. I should be able to tell the story however I want to. The longer you wait, the more of them are turned, right? I don't think so. There's nothing we can do about it at the moment, anyway. Even if I waited another hour to tell you, I don't think it would make any sort of Tits, mumbled Oberon, interrupted with a growl. Tell me what you know. Now. Fine, they're doing a ritual that's taking the captured wilder and forcing them into mortal shells, which turns them into mindless vampires. They just stand there creepily until they're given a task. But how? Mumbled Oberon's expression went from anger to bewilderment in record time. You can't make a vampire. It's a divine punishment. And how are they able to force the pact? I don't know, but there was definitely some demonic elements to the ritual. Tits crossed her arms, grinning as I looked away from their bulging chest. Very bad vibes. Demonic? Well, that complicates things. I guess that means we have no choice but to go with your suggestion, Nick. The King of Archfey turned to me expectantly, but I was distracted by a sudden awareness of a sickeningly sweet smell. The more I smelled it, the faster my heart seemed to pump. It wasn't long before I realized that my blood was pumping to a very specific location. I glared at Tits, whose grin had grown malicious. You've got to be fucking kidding me, I growled. You absolute CU. I agree that Nick's strategy would definitely be effective at keeping more Wilder from being snatched away, Yulk interrupted. I don't see how it will help with getting the captured Fae away from the vampires, though. Tits began to laugh maniacally as my eyes shot metaphorical daggers at her. Them. Whatever. Anger rose within me like a volcano ready to erupt. Trembling, I tried to calm down by turning my thoughts back to when I last felt like this. It was a few weeks after Cass and I had started officially dating. I'd gone over to her house on the weekend to study for a test on Monday. She was still wearing her pajamas when she answered the door, with a few buttons undone, just low enough to let me see down her shirt without actually seeing anything. Nash said, looking back and forth between Tits and I. We'll want to work our way through the vampires' lines to try to rescue their current captives. The shields will help us keep a good formation to do so. Looks like they're focused in the northeast, so maybe going for their flanks would be a good idea. Nash, Yulk and Mummeldobran huddled together and muttered to each other over the stump while glancing worriedly at Tits and I. Keeping Cass in my thoughts, I locked eyes with Tits. What is this? I demanded, shifting uncomfortably. Tits stopped laughing and grinned like a shark. I believe you call it perfume. Algebron suggested it. I did no such thing, a voice to my left said. Algebron entered the clearing at a steady pace and approached us. Tits turned to them and pointed accusingly. Yes, you did, they said. You said that humans spray themselves with fragrances that they find pleasant in an attempt to mimic mating pheromones. Pheromones, I shouted, feeling unusually aggressive, and Tits bit their lip and raised a brow at me flirtatiously, and I had to take a deep breath to stop myself from drawing my blade. Then Algebron waved their hand and a calm spread over me, easing the tension that had been working its way through my body. The sweet smell dissipated as Tits glared angrily at my savior. Be at ease, Nick, Algebron said. Tits' pranks come from a place of affection, after all. I'll try to look at it like that, I grumbled. So why did you tell them about pheromones in the first place? Tits has done little more than speak of you since last we met. There were a lot of questions about you, and some about humanity in general. I thought I was being careful with my answers, but I'm afraid that wasn't the case. It worked, though, Tits said smugly. Didn't it? You got aroused by me. You're wrong, I shook my head angrily. If I was aroused, and I'm not saying I was, it was because of the pheromones. And I was thinking about Cass the whole time. You ungrateful little... Tits' snarl cut off as they regained control of themselves. Fine, you're in love, whatever the hell's that is. But she's not here, Nick. You don't have her to comfort you when you're hurt, and I can be that for you. So why not? Am I not a Don't bother, Algebron interrupted. You won't like the answers to those questions, and we have far more pressing concerns. Do we not? Tits regained a neutral expression and coldly glanced between myself and Algebron. Fine, they said. Without so much as a backwards glance, Tits strolled over to the rest of the group. I took another deep breath, struggling to cope with the swell of emotions that had just overtaken me. Anger at the deceit and refusal to respect my wishes. melancholy for the memories of Cass that were unexpectedly brought up, shame at how my body reacted to something as simple as a smell. Algebran gestured for me to follow them. Once we were far enough away that we could no longer hear the rest of the group, they turned to me. Tits didn't do this out of malice, Algebran unnecessarily explained. It's just how we are. I know, I replied, I remember, and don't be so quick to lump yourself in with her. You don't do things like that. Not to you, no, but that's because I know almost everything about you. Pranks are how we learn about things that think. Why not just talk, though? Talking only works with other wild ones. Everything else can lie without consequence, so long as their deceit remains undiscovered. Algebran sighed softly. We can't. But pranks and the like elicit an honest response more often than not. If we suspect the response is dishonest, we keep pranking until we get an honest one. I nodded, suddenly understanding a lot of the memories that Algebran had inadvertently shared with me. Yulk was right. The Fae are weird. They understand us about as much as we understand them. Less, in some cases. I kind of feel bad, though, I said. Getting rejected by someone you love never feels good. Algebran snorted. I wouldn't feel bad if I were you. Tits doesn't love you. We're not capable of that. Not really. She feels infatuation, desire. She wants you, yes, but not to love. To keep like a trinket. Maybe even just to use and discard, though I have my doubts about that. You're not capable of feeling love. No, I felt it when I was reliving your life, but it's an alien feeling to me. I've never felt that before, and I never will again. I can't even provide a reasonable explanation for the feeling, or why you're able to feel it, and I can't. I can empathize. Some of your memories were of things that I can't do. And I can't really explain how they felt either, I said, staring at the ground for a moment. Is there a way to get Tits to stop? Probably not, Algebran laughed. This is a game to them, and games are our biggest weakness. But they'll learn where the line is. Eventually. I hope so, I sighed. All right, let's rejoin the strategy council or whatever. Algebran nodded, and we walked over to the rest of the group. Mummeldobran raised an eyebrow at me, and I shrugged in response. For a moment, the King of Archfey looked like it wanted to ask me something. But then it decided against it and cleared its throat. Greetings, Algebran, Mummeldobran said. We've come up with what I believe is a sound strategy to counter the enemy. That is good news, Algebran bowed their head. We're going to split our forces into 3 groups and flank the enemy, Nash explained. The goal is to break them and push toward their center, where they're keeping the prisoners. The mindless ones won't break, though, Tits sighed. They're being controlled. Yes, and Brood are fiercely competitive, Algebran added. They're unlikely to flee unless they see someone else do it first. So then we keep killing them until we open a hole to grab the prisoners, Mummeldobran shrugged. The others argued back and forth a bit more, but a thought occurred to me and wouldn't go away. The Fae get reborn if they're killed. The only reason the Archfey don't want to kill them is because they'll be punished. So what if... I put my tongue between my molars and bit a little to clear my head. There aren't any spells that I know that would guarantee a quick and painless death. If I could make a nuke spell, that would probably do it. But that would be a very, very bad thing to teach the Fae. Plus, I'm not confident that I wouldn't end up caught in it. Assassination, but how? Mummeldobran asked, pulling my head out of the clouds. I saw the taskmaster of the mindless ones, Tits explained. If he dies, they'll probably stop doing whatever they're doing. Why didn't you kill him in the first place? Because he's near the prisoners. They'd get caught up in my attack, and I assume that you don't want me becoming a vampire. Tits laughed. But I can guide someone who's a little more subtle to his location. Mummeldobran and Tits glanced at me. I resisted the urge to audibly sigh. Ooh. I get it now, Mummeldobran said. Well, it looks like this is what the higher ones wanted when they brought them here. Shit, Nash muttered. This is going to be a hard fight. Indeed, Yulk said. Actually, I think you two should hang back, Algebran said. The 3 of us stared at the Archfey, dumbfounded. Huh? I managed to say. Orcs are vulnerable to being turned, Algebran explained, or at the very least, becoming food. Tits and I can take Nick to the enemy's rear, where they're weakest, and guide him around what guards they have. The main attack will serve as a distraction, and Nick will serve as our assassin. And what happens after? Yulk asked. He'll be surrounded by vampires. Well, we know he's fairly capable of withstanding the Fair Realm, Mummeldobran added. Didn't even throw up. We can use that to get him out. We can also use it to get him into a good location. Why not right where the vampire is? I asked. There's a fairly noticeable maelstrom of energy when the Fair Realm is breached. If we pop you into their encampment, they'll all notice. That's not a problem for popping you out, though. My stomach twisted. I couldn't really tell if this was because of the thought of using the Fair Realm or nervousness due to the task at hand. I'll need some time to recover after, I said. Nash's hand appeared on my shoulder. You shouldn't do this, he said. Not without us. I know, but the only thing I can think of that would be worse than telling our mum that you died is telling her that you've become a vampire, I said. If I die, you'll miss me. But if you die, a whole family is torn apart. I see the logic, Yulk nodded. However, I strongly oppose it. We have sworn to protect you as one of our own, Nick. Also, your death will tear our family apart because you are a part of our family. Part of me really didn't want to do this. I'd be lying if I said it was a small part. My last one-on-one fight with a vampire didn't go well, and having Nash and Yulk with me would be very comforting. But Algebron was right. The more of us there are, the harder it is to be sneaky, and they're vulnerable to being fed on. I'm not. Still vulnerable to being killed, though, but if push comes to shove, I can hopefully rely on 10. They can't. You're right, Yulk. You are both my brothers, and so you know exactly how I feel right now. It will be risky for me to go by myself, but I have 10, which gives me a much better chance of survival, and I pointed out. You are both more skilled than I am, but you don't heal as fast, and if you're knocked out, you're done. I am much more likely to lose you than you are to lose me. That's a load of shit, Nash scoffed. 10 can't help you if they lob off your head. That's true, but... Bored now, Tits interrupted, grabbing my shoulder. Let's go. Before I could say anything else, the world went dark again. Chapter 78. Cold, so cold. A deep, bitter cold, the kind that digs icy fangs straight into the bones, eagerly consuming any semblance of warmth. I am broken, still broken. How long has it been since I was last whole? How did I get here? Where is this? Vague pieces of recollection slipped away the moment I tried to focus on them with my addled mind. Nothing solid formed, just brief memories of sights, sounds, and smells. Then it occurred to me, why can't I see? As I adjusted to my current state, I quickly realized that I could also no longer breathe, or move, for that matter. The question of whether or not I was still alive was answered by the hammering of my heart. It was all I could hear as well. Panic gripped me, but I could not flail, flinch, or scream. All my efforts did was make me tired, so tired. Then I heard a crack. Was that me? I pushed harder and heard more cracking, but my energy soon gave out. The last thing I remember before sleep took me was the feeling of something wet touching my face. Then darkness. A screech woke me with a start. Light. Precious light was all I could see, and it warmed my skin. I blinked and rubbed my eyes until they were able to focus again. Then I looked around and found that the screeching was coming from nearby birds. They took to the sky as I stood. Sand covered me and the ground. A massive body of water gently lapped at the sand as I brushed myself off. The ocean, and this must be a beach. The terms jumped into my mind, but I couldn't place where I learned them. As I looked around, trying to figure out what I should do next, I came to a terrifying realization. I don't know anything about who I am, where I am, or why I'm here. All I could tell is that this place felt wrong. This disconcerting feeling of being displaced set me on edge. Fear nipped at me, but I struck it down. There's hope in feeling out of place. If I feel out of place here, that means that there is a place for me elsewhere. All I need to do is find out where that is. I walked inland from the beach and spotted a trail. Again, the term popped into my mind with no recollection of where it came from. But some information came along with it. Trails are formed when things walk in the same area frequently. Perhaps if I follow the trail, I'll find someone who can tell me what happened to me, and who I am. Grunting to myself, I cautiously followed the trail, using the vegetation to the side of it was cover in case I needed to hide. The trail led to a much larger sort of path, a road. Roads are like trails, but for carts and livestock. The sun was beginning to set, and so I chose the direction that kept the sunset at my back. This would reduce my visibility to others and allow me to identify them before they could identify me. Feeling somewhat secure with my decisions thus far, I carried on until I found structures. I was suddenly able to remember some different structures. Grand constructions towering over stuff. Still vague, damn it. These structures were not anywhere near as grand, though. Crafted with loosely placed stone and bound straw, with mud as insulation, with wooden fences closing off the surrounding land. Carefully, I drew close enough to observe the beings which reside in these structures. Tanned, tall, and muscular elves were working within the fences, striking the land with crude tools. Agriculture, the growing of food for herbivorous and omnivorous entities. These elves were unlikely to assist me. The memory of my face eluded me, but the sight of my nude body was more than enough to tell me that I don't look anything like they do. A whisper of memory told me that they were once my enemies as well. What to do? If I were an elf, this would be much easier. I could simply stroll up to them and request their aid. The sudden appearance of a nude elf would likely startle them, but also appeal to their empathy. The longing to be an elf took root in my mind, and I felt a crawling sensation across my skin. I nearly panicked, but it felt natural, normal even. A few moments later, my body looked very similar to the elves that were working on the land, though a little paler. Enthralled by my transformation, I nearly forgot why it took place to begin with. Shaking myself back to reality, I continued to watch the elves and study their habits. They would already consider me strange, more so if I stuck out too much. I watched their movements, their body language when speaking to each other, their laughter, their anger, their reactions to pain and exhaustion, and the work they were doing. Taking note of these things came naturally to me, as if I had been doing it my entire life. The sun had traveled across the sky by the time I felt I had seen enough. I left the bushes I had been hiding in and began my approach. I walked with a slight limp, putting on a show of being exhausted and injured. When I reached the fence, I held up my arm and gave a weak groan. The elves almost didn't notice, but once one of them spotted me, it pointed me out to the rest. They spoke to each other for a moment, and I collapsed against the fence to give them a sense of urgency. The issue of language occurred to me as they ran to my aid. "Hey, are you all right?" one of them asked. "Oh good, I have familiarity with the way that they speak." "Help," I uttered weakly. Then I pretended to faint. "Oh shit," one of the elves said. They rushed to my aid and gently shook me in a fruitless attempt to revive me. "What should we do?" "Get him inside. I'll fetch the elder." Two of the elves lifted me by my armpits and legs. "Heavier than he looks," one of them complained. "Where did he come from?" "I don't know," the other grunted. "We'll ask him once we save him, yeah?" The elves carried me for a while, then deposited me on something soft. Maintaining my deception, I waited for the elves to decide what to do. They discussed my origin amongst themselves, and I selected the one that seemed most likely as my cover story. Before long, I heard the door to what could generously be called a hut open, and several pairs of footsteps shuffled inside. "Here he is, Elder," someone said. "Oh dear, I wonder what happened to the poor thing," a shaky feminine voice said. "Get him some water, please." I next heard the sound of quickened footsteps, then the sloshing of scooped liquid. A moment later, a hand gently gripped the back of my head and lifted it. Water then poured into and over my mouth, and I struggled not to shudder at the vile taste as I drank to keep up appearances. Finally, much to my relief, the flow stopped and my head was released. "He got a good bit of it in him. Now what, Elder?" "We can't do much more before knowing what happened," the Elder said. "So we wait. What if he's a criminal running from the law?" "Well, keep an eye out for anyone that might be looking for him, dear. If they're a guard, we'll turn him over to them. If it's anyone else, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." The conversation continued for a bit after that, but I quickly found that I wasn't entirely faking my condition. I was extremely tired and inadvertently fell asleep. When I awoke, I forgot my deception and opened my eyes to see an elderly elven female staring at me. "Hello there," she said. "I'm Elder Imyo. Who are you?" "I don't remember," I instinctively replied. I caught a glimpse of my elf-shaped hand and remembered my goal: infiltrate the elves and try to figure out how to restore my memories, or at least find out who I am, or what I am. Damn, I had an entire cover story planned out. Probably best to stick with what I know, though. "Do you remember what happened to you?" Imyo asked. As if prompted by the question, brief flashes of fangs, fire, pain, and darkness stirred within the recesses of my mind. I had been trapped, but I know not by what means. How did I escape? "No," I said. "All I remember is waking up on the beach and going to find help. Am very weak." "That's right. You collapsed just outside of the Hant's field." She nodded solemnly, then smiled. "They grow tubers." "I see. What's a tuber?" The elderly elf raised an eyebrow at the question, but proceeded to explain to the best of her abilities. I had originally intended to pretend that I was attacked, but playing off of my amnesia turned out to be a much better deception. A grain of truth within a lie makes the lie easier to swallow. We spoke at length until Imyo volunteered to allow me to stay in the village. She had already received permission from the Hant family to allow me to stay in their stables. She took me to them, and they greeted me warmly. Then they fed me a rather disgusting meal made entirely of plants, but I followed their lead and pretended to enjoy it. Then they took me to the stable and showed me a bed of straw that I could sleep in. Once they were asleep, I began to explore my surroundings. I found a rodent of sorts gnawing on a leaf in the fields and instinctively grabbed it, snapping its neck. Its life poured into me, and I felt a portion of my strength return. A hunger that I hadn't been aware of was sated, and I was left holding the corpse of the rodent. With barely a thought, I threw it toward the tree line where it would be unlikely to be discovered. Satisfied, I went back to the stable and meditated on the bed of straw until morning. In the morning, the elves came for me. They interrogated me about my well-being, then asked if I would like to work. Feeling much stronger than the day before and wanting to bolster their opinion of me, I agreed to assist with the fields. And thus began a routine. I would work the fields with the elves during the day and stalk for prey at night, taking care to dispose of the corpses accordingly. I learned several things about the elves during this time. Goti Hunt, the owner of the farm, was concerned for his daughters. They didn't seem to want to pursue mates or lives of their own, instead concerning themselves with what he considered to be minutiae. He took a liking to me almost immediately, treating me as a confidant and friend. A fool above all. Livti Hant, the matriarch of the family, had been an adventurer of some renown before settling down with Goti, whom she had saved from a pack of beasts. Her main concern revolved around their son Plaro, who was by all accounts as dumb as the tools he wielded in the fields. I was able to easily confirm this to be the case. The daughters, Yra and Aura, were twins and very close to each other. They enjoyed experimenting with different breeds of plants and were very eager to speak at length on their various discoveries. All quite boring, of course, but it was easy to get caught up in their excitement. If anything, it stirred my hunger. The sun rose and fell several times, and each time it did, I learned more about the elves, but very little about myself. Thankfully, consuming life only served to bolster my strength and was not a requirement for my continued survival. Still, it felt good, and as such I left a miniature graveyard of small animals in my wake. I was, of course, careful to dispose of them outside of the village where predators could take care of them. This continued for many days, until one day I saw something very strange. A trader had come to the village, but its elven features were as fake as my own. It also looked strikingly similar to my true form, but smaller, weaker. A strange instinct told me that it was less than I, a peon to be used as I saw fit. It appeared to have difficulty looking away from me, and I assumed that it could see my true form as well. Once it concluded its business, it set up a camp on the edge of the village. When night fell, I snuck out of the stable and sought the creature out at its camp. "You shouldn't still be on this plane. How did you get here?" it asked as I approached. "I do not know," I replied, taking a seat by the fire. "I can't remember anything." "Really? Damn, I'm Thalamus the Immolator, named as such because of my skill with the various forms of fire and fire-related activities. Thalamus grinned wickedly, and the flames surged as if to prove his point. Perhaps I can help you. I suspect that you can. But why would you? You are a valuable asset to the kings. If I help you, I'll be rewarded. Plus, once you've recovered, you might view me favorably. The kings? Who are they? Why am I valuable to them? The rulers of the hells, you're valuable to them because of your ability to shift and morph your body at will. My own disguise is a simple glamour, easily dispelled if one knows how. But you've actually changed your physical form. If it weren't for your aura, I wouldn't have recognized you at all. I can see how that would be useful. Was I a spy? You really have lost your memories. No, not a lowly spy like myself. Such a task would be wasted on one such as you. You, my lord, can change your physical form, everything about it. You're able to make your muscles stronger than they should be. You're able to shape yourself so that you can move faster than anyone else. You can even fly, completely unassisted by magic. To top it off, your command of your body doesn't end with dismemberment. Your dismembered limbs heed your call as well, and you heal much faster than most. Thalamus chuckled and shook his head. You're practically invincible. Then why am I not a king? I asked with a laugh. Because the kings are stronger than you. They're so powerful that they can't even make it through the gates, can't fit. As such, they're able to instantly annihilate you. But you are known for having potential. One day you might be strong enough to challenge them. Thalamus went on to explain that we are demons, and he is here as an advanced scout in preparation for an invasion. Soon we will try to once again take these lands as our own. All the lives we can eat, which was certainly a tempting proposition, given my current diet of small animals. But I wasn't able to give my entire focus to this dream quite yet. There was still one burning question that had not been answered. Who am I? I asked once there was a lull in the explanation. What is my name? Oh, right. Apologies. Thalamus looked flustered. I should have said right away. We stared at each other for a moment, then he cleared his throat and smiled. You are Lord Hergerus, the Decimator. So called because of your ability to kill anyone who stands against you and leave entire lands barren of life. His smile turned into a grin as he bowed. Welcome back, sire. It took a moment to process this information. I'm a high-ranking demon, one that is nearly invincible. What exactly a demon is still eludes me, though. Something I'll likely relearn in time, I'm sure. Come with me, sire, Thalamus said. We have much to do. Chapter 79. Nash Alta, Adventurer Level 9, Orc, Nulavan. Bored now, Tits said, grabbing Nick. Let's go. A whirlwind of darkness and light enveloped Nick and Tits. The maelstrom unleashed a volley of heat which burned my face, but it quickly collapsed in on itself with a cork-like pop. Yulk and I stared, stunned, at where they had just been standing. Mumuldobran and Algebrun let out a synchronous sigh. Well, I guess that settles the debate, Mumuldobran said. Where did they go? I demanded. Probably close to the enemy encampment, but far enough away to escape notice. Algebrun replied. I understand your fears, Nash, but rest assured, Tits will not allow Nick to perish. Whether or not Tits allows his death is not our concern, Yulk interjected, a measure of anger seeping into his voice. Our concern is whether or not Tits can prevent his death. He's got you there, Algebrun, Mumuldobran chuckled. Tits will do everything in their power to prevent Nick's demise or injury, Algebrun said calmly. Even if their power ultimately fails, we have other measures that can be taken. Mumuldobran's uncharacteristically jolly face fell into an expression more suited to it. Do not make promises that you cannot keep, Algebrun, the king of Archfey warned. I am fully willing to explore these measures if the need arises, Algebrun said. The higher ones obviously have a vested interest here, and the court doesn't hold me in ill reg— Enough! Mumuldobran's shout echoed through the trees surrounding us. It stood and marched over to Algebrun until they were face to face. The two stared angrily at each other. What are these measures? I asked once my ears stopped ringing. Not for you to know, Mummeldobran said coldly. It is a secret that you must hope with all your might to never uncover. What? Wait, so if it's used on Nick, he'll uncover the secret? What? No, Mummeldobran turned to me with a confused stare. Mortals aren't capable of observing their surroundings when they're dead. To him, he'll die and then wake up. If it's allowed. It will be allowed, Algebran said with a serious tone. So you say, Lesser One, Mummeldobran scoffed and retook its seat. I have my doubts, and they are far more reasonable than your certainty. Oh, whatever. No use poking at theoretical wounds. Orcs, what are your plans? Plans? I asked. We haven't had a chance to make any, Yulk said with a dour chuckle. Fair enough. Algebran can take you to wherever you want to go and have Nick meet up with you later. Or you can aid us in our fight and we will reward you. Well, that's an easy decision, I replied. Obviously What reward are you offering? Yulk interrupted. I turned to him, stunned at his sudden callousness. He held up a hand to reassure me, and then I remembered who we were dealing with. A reward to one can be a punishment to another, and the fair folk are strange ones. Oh, good catch, Mummeldobran laughed. If you had left the reward up to me, I don't know if I would have been able to resist the bag of bugs prank. What would you consider a reasonable reward to be? The aid of the fair folk who reside within the deep wild forest in helping Nick return to his home seems reasonable, Yulk said, turning to me. I nodded my assent. Our goal is to return him from whence he came, as if he hadn't left at all, by the way, Yulk grinned as he turned back to Mummeldobran. Can't have you giving us a way to get him back a few decades after he left, or some other such twist of fate. Ah well, I don't know if we'll actually be able to help, but I can assure you that we can certainly try. Mummeldobran nodded. The higher ones are offering the same reward to Nick for his compliance with their various suggestions, Algebran added. Then they've likely arranged for this discussion as well. Mummeldobran sighed. Very well, I agree. If you aid us in this fight, we will do everything within our power to help Nick return to his point of origin, home, wherever the hells he was before he came here. Then it's settled, Yulk said. Do we need to shake hands or sign something? Nope, just go along with Algebran and get equipped. I leave them to you. Mummeldobran nodded at Algebran. Understood, Algebran replied, moving between Yulk and I, placing a hand on each of our shoulders. Prepare yourselves. By the time I had registered what Algebran was going to do, and long before I could have prepared myself, darkness settled over my vision, and I once again felt an inexplicable pull. The feeling of Algebran's hand faded for a moment and then returned, but the darkness remained. It took a moment to realize that I was clenching my eyelids. With a deep, calming breath, I opened my eyes and took a look around. Interesting, Yulk said. That wasn't as bad on an empty stomach. Yeah, poor Nick, I chuckled. We had appeared in a clearing that was filled with fae, fairies, and every other variation of the fair folk that I could imagine. There were some that were familiar to me, like the bone and blood fae, and others whose natures I couldn't even begin to guess at. In the center of the clearing were several large trees that were rapidly sprouting massive bluish-green fruits. One such fruit finished its growth and dropped to the ground, where waiting fairies began carving it into slices with remarkable expertise. The slices were further carved into a transparent square and handed off to a set of bone fae who were attaching handles to them. My jaw dropped as I realized that these were the shields that Nick was talking about, and the Wilder had already made hundreds of them, maybe even thousands. Bushes surrounding the clearing were also rapidly growing their branches in an obvious spear shape. Wilder were harvesting these branches and passing them out. Algebran patted Yulk and I on the shoulder and cleared its throat. Well, this is where we're equipping everyone, it said. Get yourself a spear and shield, Nash. I prefer my axe or swords, I explained. I'm sure your skill with those weapons would serve you well in a one-on-one bout with a vampire or brood. Algebran smiled condescendingly. However, this is a full-scale battle, and you are at just as much risk as we are. It would be best if you joined the shield line. And I will be right behind you, Yulk said cheerily, blasting all the vampires that you managed to stick. Algebran nodded at Yulk's enthusiasm, and before I could protest, he gently guided us toward a line of Wilder. They were grabbing one spear and one shield each and moving on. They moved aside as we approached, and Algebron grabbed a shield and spear before turning back to me. "Here you go, Nash. Try these on for size," it said, handing them to me. I examined them, surprised at how light they were. What little experience I had with shields screamed at me that this one was far too light to be effective and that it wouldn't even be able to halt a swiftly thrown rock. It must have shown on my face, though, because Algebron laughed. "I assure you, it's quite sturdy. We've already replaced a decent portion of our front with them, and they're holding up nicely," it explained. "That being said, their lightness is an issue. You won't be able to rely on the heft of the shield to keep the enemy from pushing you back. Instead, we've found success with digging the shield into the ground, where possible." "Makes sense," I nodded. "Okay, I guess I can work with these." "Excellent. All right. This way." We trailed after Algebron as it led us away from the Fey equivalent of an armory and toward another large group of Wilder. I took in some of the sights as we walked and almost immediately wished I hadn't. Under a copse were several Wilder that were in various states of dismemberment. Half a fairy fluttered around, carrying leaves to a Fey with nothing but a jaw for a face. I realized that this must be their medical tent, and a shudder crawled up my spine when I noticed how quiet it was. There wasn't a single member of the fair folk beneath that group of trees that shouldn't be in extreme pain, but some of them were actually laughing. "Don't let it get to you," Algebron said, either reading my mind or expression. "Our physical forms are only a small part of our being, and we don't feel pain as you do. The injured and dead are the lucky ones in this case. Those that were captured are bound in iron, which is one of the few things on the mortal plane that can cause us to experience actual physical pain." "What are some other things?" Yulk asked. I looked at my brother with an unimpressed expression. Surely he didn't actually believe that Algebron would answer such a query. Truth be told, the world's heart contains a great many things that are hazardous to us. Silver, gold, platinum, and copper are the few metals that won't harm us. Aside from iron, the other metals you know of will hurt us but not kill us, it explained. Then there's the metals you don't know of, which are just as hazardous to you as they are to us. There's other things as well, but that's a conversation for another time. My shock at the explanation was short-lived, as we then had to follow the Archfey through a group of Wilder. It was difficult, but eventually Algebron came to a halt in front of a group of Bone Fey, and we followed suit. "Greeting, King Horth. I trust you're enjoying the fight?" Algebron asked. "Indeed," Horth said. "You bring me orcs? For what purpose? A snack? An addition to my collection? Both, perhaps?" "You forgot us so quickly?" I asked with a laugh. "Forgot you? When have we—" "Oh, right, Bazinoth's axe." Horth laughed. "Which makes you Nash, and that is Yulk." Yes, I recall. So not a snack, then?" "No, not a snack," Algebron said. "They're to join you in combat on this day. Guide them well and enjoy yourself, for this may be the last fight we face against this foe." "Truly? Shame. They're quite strong. Bazinoth fell, by the way." "I know. They'll be back, though." "Yeah, sadly." "The King of Bloodfey fell. How?" Yulk asked. "How did the King of Bloodfey fall against a horde of vampire brood?" Horth laughed heartily. "How do you think? They swarmed over Bazinoth like a buffet. It was hilarious. I'm never going to let 'em live it down." "Oh. Oh dear. Right, well, I leave them in your care," Algebron said. "I hope to see you again soon, Alta brothers." We said goodbye to Algebron, who surprisingly departed on foot instead of through some kind of trans-dimensional portal or whatever, and listened to Horth discuss strategy with some of the other Bone Fey. Thankfully, there wasn't much to discuss, and soon we formed up and began to march through the forest. I found myself at the front of the formation, with Yulk just behind me. We marched for a while in silence before I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Are you nervous?" Yulk asked. "A little." "You?" "Nope, I've got you with a big shield in front of me, and all I have to do is cast Fireball a few times," he chuckled. "Lucky you," I said sarcastically. The march continued until we cleared the trees. "Form the line." The Bone Fey next to me halted, and I followed suit. The rest of the Bone Fey in the rear of the formation came forward and stood next to us. With a hint of jealousy, I noted that their spears were way cooler than mine. I glanced back and saw that there were plenty of fae and fairies accompanying Yulk too. We wouldn't be wanting for firepower, that's for sure. March! We continued onward until we saw the first signs of battle. Smoke clung to the air, stinging my eyes and throat. A fae standing on a fallen tree noticed us and shouted something, and a bunch of wilder began to run in our direction. Open ranks! Let 'em through! The formation opened up, allowing the fleeing wilder to pass by us without issue. Hot on their heels were a horde of vampire brood. I took a deep breath and steeled myself. Close ranks! Our formation closed just before the brood hit us. Remembering Algebran's advice, I dug my shield into the ground and pushed with all my might. I struggled for a moment, then remembered my spear. I pulled back, then thrust the spear forward and feeling it hit home. Claws and teeth scraped and gnashed at my shield. The brood pinned against my shield by its comrades was as hideous as it was livid. It had no nose, ears, or eyelids, and its gnashing jaws contained sharpened teeth in a proper line like an elf's. The bones of its fingers and toes were exposed, with the ends of each tapering off into claws. The creature's muscles twitched out of sync with its movements. Piercing red eyes met my own with pure, unadulterated rage as it struggled to find a way through my shield. Fireballs flew over our shields, slamming into the brood and igniting them. Some of them fled, but others were impaled and couldn't escape so easily. The brood my spear had found screeched and jerked erratically as it tried to free itself from the flames. Once it stopped moving, I pulled the spear free. The remaining brood had backed up a ways and took a moment to gather themselves. Then they attacked again, much to the same result. I stabbed but didn't feel anything, so I tried again and again until I got one. More fireballs flew, more brood ignited, and the brood gave ground once again. Forward! Don't let them rest! We lifted our shields from the ground and stepped over the still burning corpses of the brood to go after their comrades. The brood looked nervous, but before they could flee, they were pushed aside by drow. The drow began to charge at us, and it wasn't until they opened their mouths that I realized they were vampires. Hold! Our shields slammed into the ground again, and I prepared to thrust my spear home. Then the drow stopped moving and appeared stupefied. Seeing this, the brood panicked and ran in the opposite direction. What? Already? Yulk asked. Chapter 80. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 7, Human American. The darkness faded at the same time as the uncanny pulling sensation, and I found myself surrounded by trees. Again. Par for the course when dealing with the fairfolk, I guess. At least they're the same kind, though. The familiarity of the trees and scenery helped a lot with my nausea, but a little bit of my breakfast made it back into my mouth regardless. The spicy kick distracted me from how gross it was, and I quickly spit it onto the ground. Tits chuckled as I spit and rubbed tears from my eyes. That was a lot less than I was expecting, it said. What, my breakfast? I asked, wiping my face. Yeah, I didn't throw up all the way. I know, that's what I'm saying. I expected an unexpected pull like that to make you spew like a geyser. Kind of disappointed. Well, I don't know what to tell you, I rolled my eyes. I have a strong stomach. Tits rubbed its chin thoughtfully. You know, there's a chance we might be able to teach you how to use the Fair Realm. Wait, really? Maybe. Very maybe. It's not like mortal magic, and we would have to get a bunch of different agreements done. It thought for a moment. Actually, forget I mentioned it. Probably shouldn't even have said that it could be possibly possible. Let's just pretend I didn't say anything. Okay, sweetie. Tits stepped toward me as if to ruffle my hair, but I instinctively took a step back. What? Are you still mad at me? It was just a joke, Nick, it whined. It was literally just a few minutes ago, and that kind of thing isn't a joke, Tits, I replied. It's, I don't know, disrespectful? Disrespectful? How? I don't know, damn it. Not really. But you know I made a promise to Cass. When you play around like you do, you're pretty much saying that the promise I made is worthless. That my word is worthless. I crossed my arms angrily. And if my word is worthless, then I'm worthless. Ah, Tits said, leaning closer. But you're so fucking hot, though. My own inability to properly explain why I was angry, combined with the arch-fae's dismissive attitude, caused rage to bubble up within me. I gave Tits the angriest glare my face could muster, but it laughed and backed away, raising its hands. Fine, fine, I will stop playing around long enough to fully understand the issue, it said. Maybe. We'll talk more about it later, though. You know, stuff to do, necks to sever, or slice. Do you sever heads and slice necks, or does the verbiage even matter? Whatever, give me your sword. I sighed and unsheathed my blade, offering it to Tits by the handle. The archfey took the sword and sighed. This isn't going to smell good, it warned. Tits ran its finger along the blade of my sword. The flesh on its finger sizzled and released a pungent scent that smelled vaguely of what I imagine rotten almonds smell like. The acrid stench clouded the air, causing my stomach to turn in knots as Tits did the same with the other side of the edge. Finally, it presented my sword back to me. What did you do? I asked, trying desperately not to heave. Sharpened it. Now it will slice clean through even the thickest of neck bones. That hurt, so you should say thanks. Tits grinned. Thank you. Your gratitude is appreciated. Now that your sword is decapitation ready, we need to get you into their encampment. I'll guide you. Tits stretched their arms into the air as if just waking up from a long nap. My confused expression was met with a grin that quickly began to distort as the archfey's arms began to twist and contort in disgusting ways. The soft pink flesh began to pale and bubble, and black spots formed and extended themselves through the flesh. I was forced to look away as what was left of my breakfast began to mutiny once again. The sounds weren't any better, though. Loud squelching and popping echoed throughout the trees for several moments, and I tried desperately not to imagine what visuals the noises coincided with. Then, blessed silence. I turned to take a peek and was met with a crow staring back at me with what could almost be called a smug expression. Caw, it said, with an unmistakably sarcastic tone. That was gross, I shuddered a little. So, how are you going to guide me? Can crows talk? A little, but telepathy would be better, Tits' voice said in my head. Shouting at you from the treetops would probably attract attention. Okay, lead the way then. Tits flapped its wings and launched into the air, but didn't go far. I watched the archfey turned crow perch on a branch and look around for a moment. This way, it said. Okay, how far is it? I asked. Not that far. You can make some noise if you need to practice your stealth. I'll let you know when you need to be quiet. How far is what? Ten asked. Ten's question caught me off guard, but I began to walk regardless. I thought about how to answer for a moment and decided I should speak aloud to avoid Tits becoming confused as well. 10, you don't hear Tits? No, is the archfey speaking to you? Yeah, directly into my mind, like you and the higher ones do. Interesting. Interesting was one way to put it. I wondered if Tits could hear 10, but decided against experimentation. I'm not even certain if Tits actually knows about 10 or not. Algebran does, because of my memories. But whether or not Algebran told anyone is an entirely different story. As I made my way through the forest, stepping through foliage and over fallen logs, I felt a pang of guilt. 10 had been instrumental to my survival. It saved me from the crazy guy in the dungeon, from the Nahalim that had attacked us on the road, and even from the vampire that had nearly killed us all. I've trained and trained, but it never seems like it's enough. Maybe Nash and I have the wrong idea, and I should be focusing on magical studies instead. Too late for that now, though. Time for quiet, Tits said. A tree has fallen through the log wall ahead. They haven't repaired it yet, so you can get through. There are some of the dead-mind vampires patrolling, but they aren't exactly searching every nook and cranny. As long as you're not noisy, they probably won't notice you. Okay. I carefully crept through the vegetation until I found the fallen tree Tits had mentioned. Just as it had said, an absolutely massive log had toppled directly into the wall that the vampires had hastily erected. As quietly as I could, I climbed onto the log and crawled along it until I was over the wall. Then I dropped down and waited to see if someone had heard me. You're fine to move. The Duke routinely visits the pens that are to your right. There are patrols, but you will be able to use some cages to avoid being seen." "All right," I replied with a mental sigh. With my heart pumping faster than it ever has before, I quickly began to move in the direction Tits had indicated. I kept an eye out for any passing vampires, but all there seemed to be were tents and crates. I found the cages and crept up to them to wait for Tits to tell me where to go next. "You're not a vampire." I nearly jumped out of my skin, but quickly discovered the voice had come from a fairy that was locked within the nearest cage. I crept up to the cage as quietly as I could. "No, I'm not," I replied. "I'm here to kill a vampire." "You gonna help us?" the fae in the next cage over asked. "What's going on?" Tits asked. "The fair folk in the cages are asking questions," I explained. "Okay, be careful. There's brood nearby. I'll tell you if they start to move in your direction." "Well," the fae asked, "you gonna help us or not?" I want to, but I don't know how I can," I said. "Could let us out," the fairy chuckled. "If I let you out, they'll figure out that I'm here. Then they'll kill me and put you right back into the cages. But once I kill the vampire duke, Mummeldobran, Algebran, and Tits will be able to hell." "You could just kill us," the fae interrupted. "Yeah, that's true," the fairy agreed. "That sword looks pretty sharp." "Well, what?" I asked, dumbfounded. "If you kill us, we'll be reborn," the fae explained. "We'll lose our memories and current identities. But honestly, that's not so bad. I'd rather not remember what hurt feels like. Fire hurts mortals, right?" Yeah, it does." "Oh good, so you'll know what I mean when I say it feels like fire is flowing through my veins right now." A loud clang rang out. "Shut the fuck up," a booming voice shouted. I peeked around the cages and saw several disfigured forms standing around. The only facial features they seemed to have were their wild eyes and toothy jaws. One of the brood was looking in our direction, prompting me to quickly take cover behind the cage. "Come, make me, cockbiter," the fae shouted back. I looked at the fae with alarm, but it simply winked back at me. "The fuck did you say to me?" "You... No. If you kills it, we will die," a different voice said sternly. "We do something else. Food." "Food," the first brood repeated. "Food is good. Let's go." I peeked out from behind the cage and watched them turn and walk away. With a sigh, I turned my attention back to the caged fairfolk. The fae looked smug. "See, they aren't allowed to kill us, and they can't really help themselves when it comes down to it," the fae explained with a small, pained groan. "They don't want to be flayed alive by their masters, so they run away when provoked. Now, you gonna kill us?" The fae and the fairy looked at me, waiting for my reply. Their pained expressions tugged at my heart, but I couldn't help but balk at the thought of killing innocent people. They'll be reborn, sure, but not as they are now. It really will be murder. A mercy killing, but still murder. Could I do such a thing, even to alleviate their suffering? "I'm sorry, I don't think I can," I said. "But you're here to kill the vampire duke, right?" the fairy asked. "Isn't it the same thing?" "Well, no. The duke is an enemy. Killing him is justifiable. You're not enemies, you're friends. Killing you isn't justifiable." "Friends? What do you mean, friends?" The fairy rubbed its eyes and looked closer at me. "Oh, I see. Well, shit, he can't kill us." "Why not?" the fae asked. "He's Nick, the human that just became a friend of the fairfolk. Killing us could invalidate that friendship." "Oh, come on. If I was Mummeldobran, I'd forgive him." "Yeah, but you're not enough of a stamen to be Mummeldobran." "That's true." "Well, fuck, okay, Nick. I guess you can't kill us. Just do what you came to do quickly, so we can be rescued or whatever. This shit hurts." "I will, I promise," I said. Then I reached out to Tits. "Am I all right to move?" "Yes. Follow the path that the cages make and take the first right. Then go until you find some bushes. That will be the best spot for our ambush. You need to hurry, the Duke is on the move." I nodded to the fae and fairy, then moved as stealthily and quickly as I could in the direction that Tits had said. There were more fairfolk, but they were much worse off than the other two and didn't feel like talking. My conscience was assaulted by guilt over the relief I felt for that. After pausing to let some more brood pass, I made the turn and found the bushes. I pushed their leaves aside and found a clear spot to hide in, then waited. The most difficult part was trying to control my breathing. Moving quickly and quietly was exhausting, but panting would give me away. I took some deep, controlled breaths to recover. Here he comes, get ready. I peeked through the leaves and saw the vampire. He looked like a shriveled old man with pointy ears. Another pang of guilt hit me, but I wiped it away with the thought of what this thing was doing to the fair folk. The fact that he's old doesn't matter, especially when he's killing my friends. Plus, if given the chance, he'd kill me too. This isn't murder, it's war. The Duke drew closer, and I involuntarily held my breath. My sword seemed to throb in my hand, and I readied myself to leap out and swing it with all my might. I knew I probably wouldn't need to swing that hard, but one minor mistake could spell failure and death. The Duke's slow stroll finally took him past me, and I leapt from the bushes with my sword ready. He turned to face me, completely devoid of expression, but I was already swinging. To my surprise, my sword swung clean through his neck with almost no resistance. The Duke's body and head crumpled to the ground separately, and blood began to spray from the wounds. Some of it splashed on my face, and I took a step back to avoid getting drenched. I wiped at the blood on my face and grimly examined my work. The gruesome scene burned itself into my mind, promising to visit me the next time I tried to rest. With a sigh, I raised my hand toward the Duke. Labyrinth Sack.